Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto was a royal guard in Bleach. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Sierra BN312 and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Prologue: the start of something. Mid-June, 1984. Summer sunlight passed through the scant clouds that hung above Sirte, bathing the court of pure souls in a pleasant ambience that one would associate with the Christian interpretation of heaven. Numerous officers of the Gate 13, be they seated or otherwise, made their rounds through the Sengoku-style walled streets, while stealth force adepts flitted across rooftops to watch for dissident actions. All the while the superstructure Squad 1 barracks loomed over them beside the edge plateau of Sakyoku Hill, an ever-standing reminder that this afterlife was regimented and run by law. And for those that stood against the laws of the Soul Society, the great halberd Sakyoku gleamed in the sun waiting for someone to try it. Within the halls of the Squad 1 barracks, many aides and Shinigami relayed messages to those that needed them, logistical savants working behind the scenes to make sure that the military governance of the Gate ran like clockwork. At the heart of this building was a single hall concealed behind a pair of thick shoji doors. The captain's meeting hall was in use. 13 captains and 1 lieutenant, all of them arranged in 2 lines standing save for 3. Seated upon a simple chair at the far end of the hall, sat the wizened, aged form of Genusai Shikakuni Yamamoto, head captain of the Gate 13 and overall most powerful man in the Soul Society. He sat stooped with age on the edge of the seat, leaning upon his cane with a long white beard, nearly touching the hardwood floor of the hall, eyes squinted but focused on the man standing before him. In comparison to the short, stooped form of Yamamoto, Isshin Shiba was as far away as one could get from the old man in terms of looks and temperament. He was a tall, muscular young man appearing in his early 20s with sharp features, brown eyes and spiky black hair with well-trimmed sideburns. He wore a Shinigami's shihakusho in addition to a sleeveless captain's haori with black lining and the kanji for 10 on his back, indicative of his position as the captain of Squad 10. And that concludes my report. After finally eradicating the strange hollow that had been killing Shinigami relentlessly in Naruki City, the captain of Squad 10 of the Gate 13, Isshin had made sure to have his I's dotted and T's crossed when old man Yama called a captain's meeting to sort out his actions. Isshin stood in the middle as all other members had taken their respective places at the side in numerical order across from one another. Even Yukitake was able to make it in thanks to having his health maintaining some strength for the time being, though with each passing day that was becoming a rare occurrence. This was the first time in 6 months that all 13 captains had been in one place. I see Yamamoto, who after deliberating on all of the facts that Isshin had provided in his report, decided on whether or not the young captain would be punished. Embarking on a mission without authorization is an offense, minor as it may be. But thanks to your snap judgment, the deaths were kept to a minimum. So far so good in Isshin's eyes. Furthermore, the collateral damage done to the world of the living was kept at a minimal level. Therefore, here it comes. This slight violation will be overlooked. The old man had given his judgment of the situation and felt that Isshin's actions were justified, and even then, the crime was minor, not even worth really giving out punishment for. Isshin's features broke from their prior mask of professional detachment. He felt so damned good right now. AWWWYEAHH. He initially brought a fist up to his chest in victory for whooping ass, but then he remembered in a split second that he was in a captain's meeting and unlike with his own squad, he couldn't fuck around like that with no repercussions. I mean, thank you very much. He bowed his head as low as he could to try and at least maintain some level of respect. Isshin knew he was a pretty young guy when it came to being a captain, even when compared to Jin Ichimaru from Squad 3, well younger than Isshin had been in the job longer. Isshin still had the tendencies to be aloof and clumsy, while acting like he knew nothing to throw people off to try and get out of doing paperwork. That, and the young hardly ever got any respect. Crotchety old bastards, the lot of them. Granted, inter-squad mingling was something that didn't happen much these days. That's what he had Ranjiku and Mshurm for. Well, the latter at least did the paperwork without so much as a complaint. The former always chased him down to make sure he did his paperwork. Hell no, Isshin had better things to do. Ranjiku was also a hypocrite who spent Squad 10's budget on her own fashion tastes and drinking binges. Ha! Cackled the voice of Mayuri Kuritsuchi in a bark of laughter before continuing, the bigger violation here is failing to return with the remains, however little it may have been, of the mysterious hollow. Yamamoto's squinted brown eyes turned to Mayuri, noticing that the clown-faced captain's posture was giving away that he had something else to say, though most likely on an unrelated subject, so he felt it best to get things over with, but not without asking one last thing. By the way, Isshin's head rose back up to direct his attention towards Yamamoto. The demise of the hollow you described in your report was rather strange. And indeed, it was. In his 3,000 years of being a Shinigami and killing hollows, never once did he encounter one that would implode on itself and then suddenly explode violently as it dissipated into nothingness. Going over Isen's report, he felt something was off, as if the Shiba may have either missed something the previous night or I can't help but think you have left out a few important details. He looked Isen in the eye to confirm his suspicions. Is there anything further you'd like to add to your report? Isen's mind briefly flashed back to that Quincy girl, Masaki, as she stood over him offering help. Smiling, as he didn't think of her as his enemy like they had been taught at Shin Academy. He got her name, but he never gave his. She was simply a good Samaritan, but he wouldn't put it past a lawful Byakuya, psychotic Mayuri, or battle-mad Kenpachi to go after her for interfering in Soul Society business. So, he lied. No, there's nothing else. Very well then, as Isen took his position in between Mayuri and the formerly snickering Shunsui that thought Isen's previous actions entertaining, Yamamoto continued on, now, is there anything else anyone would like to bring up in this meeting? He saw that Mayuri had stepped up slowly. Captain Kuristuchi. You have something to say. Quite so, in fact, I just received an update that there is an unidentifiable anomaly in the world of the living. The clown-faced scientist said clearly, taking up the same position that Isen had vacated. The anomaly was logged in our scanning equipment and listed as an unknown variable. The Dairaisho archives created a brand new log just for this anomaly, as opposed to falling into any existing being encountered by the Gate 13 or Shinigami in general. Yamamoto arched a brow in slight confusion before a modicum of irritation came through his voice. Why wasn't I informed of this immediately? If anything like that came up, he fully expected to be informed the moment that the Dairaisho archives were updated to ensure he would remember such a thing to pass on to his successor. If Mayuri was fazed by the old man's rising tone, he didn't show it. The reason why is because I had to check it with a more curious issue. The archives were accessed from a remote source before I found out, that's why. Mayuri said, rolling his eyes at the thought that people still didn't think he wasn't pragmatic to draw a proper conclusion before giving a report. He was not Zaraki. So, what you're saying is that we have an intelligence leak. If so, then this was a critical breach in their infrastructure. If only he knew. It is not a matter of internal security, Mayuri rebutted flippantly, elongated middle fingernail pointing skyward, but rather instead, the archives were accessed from above us, in the royal palace. Squad 0. Those last few words set all of the captains on edge, even the battle-crazy Kenpachi, the ever-smirking Jin and the stoic Byakuya. The Royal Guard, or Squad 0 as they were referred to at times, were tasked with defending and protecting the Soul King himself. Stationed as they were within the fighter dimension of the royal palace, they rarely ever came down to get involved with the business of the Sirete, and never did they get involved with the world of the living's affairs. To become interested in such a thing was unprecedented. Thus, it begged the question, what was it about the anomaly that had drawn the attention of what were essentially gods of Shinigami? The old man knew this and asked for assurance, are you quite sure that Squad 0 accessed the archives? Of course, I'm sure. Mayuri replied frankly, slightly insulted for doubts to be cast on his report. I backtraced the access signal to the dimensional barrier and recognized the handstroke of the former Squad 12 captain, Kiryu Hikifune. Without a doubt, she accessed the archives while submitting the anomaly as an unknown presence in the world of the living. Mayuri's grumbling spoke of a bruised ego, his antipathy to his Squad 12 predecessors being well documented. It was known well that access to the Dairashi archives was minimal, only going through the Central 46 compound, and even then, access to it was limited to only a few individuals. One such individual narrowed his eyes in discontent despite his blank aristocratic features. I was not informed of such an archival breach, meaning that the importance of this anomaly is worth going over the Kichiki clan for, said the monotone voice of Byakuya Kichiki. His family had been in charge of maintaining history documentation of the Soul Society since before even the formation of the Sirete. What was the location of this anomaly? Mayuri turned to look at the captain of Squad 6, face bored at being forced to talk to lower intelligence. 3,500th parallel, the foot of Mount Fuji. Old man Yama dipped his head in thought. Whatever reason that the Royal Guard had to become so interested in something beyond their role, it was something significant that could significantly affect the balance of the three realms. Whether or not it was a pro or a con depended on how they acted. Until we can ascertain this anomaly correctly, we will continue to operate normally. However, if any new information is uncovered, I want to have the Gate on standby should the situation change. You are all dismissed. Yamamoto rapped his cane against the floor, bringing the meeting to a close, the shoji sliding open and the other 12 captains filing out. As the captains left back to their barracks, 3 had stayed together as they made their way towards their little lab hidden away from prying eyes. Gotta say, I didn't think we'd get anything interesting after watching the young captain fight White, wouldn't you say? Said a lilting, sing-song voice. Considering the circumstances, it may be prudent to stay on alert. I doubt our actions will remain hidden from the rest of the Getae for much longer. Replied a stoic tone, unamused at the first speaker's choice of words. No need to worry, Kanam. The two captains previously speaking with one another, Jin Ichimaru and Kanam Tmsen, halted as the third and leader of their secret little cabal, one Samsukezen, spoke up to ease his confidant's worry. If anything, this may provide us with another unique opportunity. His words alluding to the meeting between Is and Shiba and the Quincy girl that had killed White, a creation of their own by basing its design off of a dead Shinigami, making it an imposing hollow. Something that would have been considered as a pseudo-rancor of sorts if one were to truly specify what type of hollow it was. Upon the Quincy girl's interference into the battle test, White broke off its ever-escalating engagement with Isin to attack her. How odd and yet interesting that White, a hollow by its nature despite its unique design, chose to try and Holofia Quincy, its polar opposite in a state of existence. However, Quincy's were unable to adopt Hollow's powers as they held no antibodies to defend themselves against Hollows, hence why they so dogmatically hunted Hollows in the past, to the extent of eradicating them from existence. It was simply in their nature to kill something that could end them with such ease. All in all, if she by some miracle survived the process, then more than likely it would draw the attention of one Kisuke Urahara or the Vizards, all the sweeter, if anything, whatever it is that's now in the world of the living will reveal itself in time. For now though, let's continue as we intended. It was almost time for a trip to Hueco Mundo anyways to deal with a certain king of hollows. The world of the living. South side of Mount Fuji. A pair of blue eyes cracked open upon waking up. Ugh, did it work? Said pair of eyes belonged to one Naruto Uzumaki, who had arrived in this new world in a rather unorthodox way, so to speak. Lifting himself up from the dirt, Naruto dusted himself off as he did a check over of his supplies from his backpack and a large scroll he carried with him. Let's see. Rummaging through his backpack, he took stock of his tools, supplies, food, etc. Everything seems in good condition. Plenty of kunai, shuriken, bombs, medical stuff. Yup, all set. So now that you're somewhere else, where do you think you'll start? Kurama asked internally to his partner. Naruto looked around before he started climbing out of the crater he had found himself in to try and find someplace to get his bearings. Well, best to get out of here in case someone comes looking for the source of this whole mess. As Naruto made his way through the forest he arrived in, he could hear the faint sound of a series of waterfalls not too far from his position. Waterfalls. Maybe I can get a good look at the stars from there. Naruto began to move towards the reverberating echo of the waterfalls, running in earnest to see if the results of his endeavor worked. Bounding through the rocks and dirt, quickly making his way through the bamboo forest that surrounded him, Naruto soon found himself staring at the magnificent sight. Clearing the tree line revealed a level river accompanied by a path on its left side, traveling all the way up to the source of the running water. It was not a particularly tall waterfall, not even reaching half the height of those within the Falls of Truth, but they held their own beauty and serenity that were hard to put into words. At the very edge of the plateau was an unbroken number of trees that stuck out in stubborn opposition to the torrent of life-giving water that rushed past them, thundering down into the pool below, before becoming the slowly flowing river. The overhanging crescent moon was reflected in the rippling pool of water, breathing the dappled and pale light back up into the thundering waters above with a white glow. All in all, it created one of nature's many beautiful sights. Now as much as Naruto would like to take this place in, he needed to know something. Gazing up to the sky, Naruto saw that the stars were aligned differently than what he recognized. It worked. Not long after stopping Toneri from dropping the moon on the world, Naruto had been thinking long and hard on how the world had come to be, since the Otsutsuki descendant had made a point that the world wasn't as kind as it should have been. He knew that becoming the Hokage was always his dream, though honestly, he just wanted the admiration and respect of the villagers, since so many of them looked down upon him when he was younger. The thing was he already had that. Ever since he had killed Pain and the subsequent Fourth Great Shinobi War, he had the respect and admiration of the village in droves, so what was the title of Hokage at that point? Just that, a title. Though this chain of thought had begun a process of soul-searching that had taken Naruto in a rather philosophical direction. Suppose that he did become the Hokage, which given his reputation and actions throughout his life, he'd more than likely get that hat after Kakashi-sensei stepped down, but really, all it would mean is that the peace brought by the allied shinobi forces would be perpetuated, and there were many others that could do that better than him. But there was something else involved with all of this thinking. That he had grown tired of doing so much fighting to change the way the world functioned, and that he realized that he would be used. True that he was still fond of the village and his friends there, all the people that had helped forge him into the person he was now, he couldn't help but see the system in a different light. It brought Naruto back to his main question, namely what exactly did he want in life where all obligations had been fulfilled? When was he most happy and how could that be achieved again? The answer had come to him one night when visiting Jiraiya's grave. It was the time spent traveling with the sage, interacting with new cultures and peoples to learn from them. to understand others so that he could grow as a person and strengthen character like Jiraiya before him, that was what Naruto desired. And so, Naruto decided to take a journey across the known world in an effort to try and learn more about the people of the world from their varying cultures and ways they lived would help him understand what his place in the world would be. The scroll he currently carried on his back with him held a lot of what he had learned from the various countries, from the people to their history, the jutsu that he had encountered throughout his life and journey. It had given him a severe amount of learning to do. Although, that changed upon coming across an ancient temple that was half buried underground. Seeing the temple as having been nearly untouched for centuries, if not millennia, Naruto entered it to see that it had been linked to the Otsutsuki, no doubt from Kagaya's time in the world and the legend she had spawned having arrived from some faraway land. Now, while Naruto himself wasn't the best at understanding things, he was able to interpret that deep in the lower levels of the temple, it could take one to some other world. That's when it hit him. This was his out to the system of death that had been created from Ashura and Indra's blood feud that came to an end at his and Sasuke's hands. Taking the time to try and learn as much as he could, with Kurama's help in figuring it out, the lower levels of the temple acted as an amplifier of sorts, while the bottom had carved out similarly to the Roaring line that sat beneath the old city. Massive amounts of chakra had been stored within it, and after learning how to use the temple to his endeavors, Naruto used it to leave his old world behind. He knew more than likely it was possibly a one-way trip, so he decided to get comfy with his eventual new home, hoping that it would be better than his old one. Naruto shook his head at his actions, not wanting any regrets to come to mind. Well, I think I need to start looking for a place to grab some sleep since I don't plan on camping anytime soon. And what better way than to use his senjutsu to find civilization. Sitting down on the ground, Naruto began to gather up the natural energy of the world to sense any nearby cities to crash at, only to find that the natural energy was somewhat murky to say the least. As if part of the world was slowly dying down compared to his original one. This just meant that he merely needed to double down on the process, which wasn't an issue for him. As he delved into the world around him, he could feel that this entire land was so pristine, yet densely populated, and just his luck, a massive population wasn't that far from his position. Guess I know where I'm going. Oh, how the world would only know of how interesting things were going to get from here on out. A few weeks later. July 1984. West Tokyo, Suinatana. Not long after arriving in this new world, Naruto acquired some spare clothes to better fit into society. Turns out, there wasn't anyone that dressed like he or anyone else did for that matter due to the military not being composed of shinobi. A plus in his book, though there were still some conflicts every now and then between countries, not on the same level of scale as the Great Ninja Wars. Then again, war was an ugly business regardless of size. Either way, overall, this new world was relatively more peaceful than his own, even if a bit more complicated with so many countries connected to one another in various forms. Walking down the streets of the western side of the massive metropolis that was Tokyo, Naruto was currently in the town of Suinatana in the Chuno ward of Tokyo. It was backed by the wide and fast-flowing Sagami River, dominated by Japanese-style two-story houses with plenty of greenery around and a lot of electrical cables. Cars, as they were called, were parked along the streets, and various vending machines were on quite a few corners. The further east he pushed the thicker it got, but there was a serene buzz of nightlife near restaurants and the like, with Greater Tokyo visible from one of the hills. The nightlife was certainly something to see, with a different yet beautiful vibe that nature had at times. Naruto was wearing a simple black shirt with grey cargo pants, along with a pair of orange Converse shoes. His old backpack had been ditched in favor of a far more spacious new one, and with some bit of work, he was able to make the new backpack far more spacious and seal quite a few things into it, along with the large scroll he had been carrying when he first arrived. Turns out, no one carried those things on their backs like he and Jiraiya did, it would take some getting used to. All of these things he acquired through some illicit means, including money that he managed to get a hold of to live out on his own, despite moving from place to place. In hand, he had some takeout food he had bought and wanted to eat out overlooking the view of Tokyo as he made his way over towards the hills. Hard to believe that there are so many people grouped together in cities this size. Were you expecting something less? It's a cosmic crapshoot that the people of this land speak the same language as you, count your blessings. Kurama said as he explained something so simple. In truth, their own society could have followed a very similar pathway throughout history had certain choices have been made or people lived to build such monuments of civilization. Great discoveries could have been made had the various clans simply focused on other things and not just warfare. Even chakra, that was the heart of shinobi society, had they learned to develop without it, then maybe something like this would have been possible. Naruto shrugged slightly as he unloaded his food to start eating. I don't know, I guess, maybe. He opened up a carton to reveal some instant ramen. Anyways, things look a lot more peaceful than back home, even if petty stuff still gets thrown around every now and then. Cracking the pair of chopsticks, he began digging into the delicious goodness that was his all-time favorite. Besides, I think I'm gonna probably head north and then come back around the south of the main island chain before I decide to head next door to South Korea. Japan had so many various similarities with his old world's countries, which meant that there probably wasn't much of a difference in ways of thinking, but he'd hold his opinion out until he saw the country in its entirety. Naruto was mulling over his plan internally, that is until he felt some negative intent that was akin to some dark form of hunger. Wait, what the hell? Sensing the intent from behind, Naruto turned to see a strange creature that he could partially make out before it let out a low roar that echoed into the night. What powerful Ryoryoku, and in a human no less. I've struck gold tonight. As the creature came closer, Naruto was able to see that it was some giant insect of sorts, about twice the size of one of those trucks he had seen around the town. Its body was similar to a mantis, although where the bug usually had a set of front legs, this thing had more humanoid arms with a set of claws, but only 3 digits as opposed to 5. The skin, if it could be called that, was pitch black, along with red dots making a pattern that went along its lateral sides. Then there was that giant hole in its chest cavity that was angled up in a way that would break the backs of most animals. But what really seemed to make its appearance all the more unsettling, well, that is for those that hadn't stared down a certain rabbit goddess, was the giant door-sized white mask that held jagged teeth that looked like it was a gaping, rotting maw with red glowing lights, signifying the eyes in the open sockets. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the creature, not sure whether it was worth the time to actually test its fighting capabilities or just put it down quickly. He hadn't encountered one of these things yet since he had first arrived here, but the blonde also didn't want his food to go bad. What the hell are you? He asked while setting the carton of noodles down, the steam from the water used to heat them wafting in the fresh June night air. He had found that it tended to rain a lot in Japan during June, so this calm night had been a welcome change, had being the operative word. It appeared that the creature grew even more excited, or rather, its fervor to eat him grew even more as it salivated while it spoke again with its reverberating tone, and he can see me too. How delightful. Now, why don't you be a good little human and stay still, so that I can eat your soul? Feel free to scream all you like, it adds to the drama of the meal. Yeah, sorry, but I like having my soul. I plan on using it for a long time. Naruto replied, not at all threatened by the oversized bug, more curious than anything. He had suplexed Kurama before, that was a threatening encounter. Then I hope a long time for you will be just a few seconds then. Naruto rolled his eyes, all sense of playfulness evaporating from his surface thoughts. The creature dived straight at him, clawed arms swinging forwards with the intent of reducing him to pat and eating his soul from his cooling corpse. A regular human would have probably been transfixed by the spectral beast and been gored to death. If they were lucky, then they would jump out of the way and run to perceived safety, only to be chased down by the faster hollow. Naruto was no ordinary human. To him, the claw might as well have been stopped in the air. So long did the arm take to descend that he was able to perceive the odd energy dwelling within the beast and respond accordingly. Naruto focused on bringing up his chakra that flashed in an instant that practically incinerated the creature's entire right side to the point that it started to dissipate. The beast tried to crawl up to him, body breaking down into black particles of that strange energy as it began speaking once again. What the hell, what kind of human are you? Naruto wasn't really into giving his name out so freely. He was, however, one for theatrics, and that bled into his response, one of a kind. He said with a smirk adorning his features as the creature completely vanished. Turning back to his ramen, Naruto picked up the still steaming carton and added the flavor packet to it, glad that it's still warm. He hummed in satisfaction at the goodness that the food of the gods provided him with. Nearby, a Shinigami named Kitashi Ryusei sighed audibly while jumping between rooftops in his recently given post of the handling hollows in the 3500th district, though he really just wanted to slash something as of late, son of a bitch. My brother's off kissing Madaram's ass while I get posted to this district. I expect to go kill some hollows and don't see jack shit. Gimme a break, what a crap posting. Kitashi was the archetypal Shinigami in terms of appearance, robust if forgettable features and messy black hair with black asauchi at his left hip. He also had a serious chip on his shoulder. Kitashi was from Squad 11. The squad renowned for being the one squad that specialized in melee-based combat, foregoing things such as kidm, with it being called cowardice. Many of the members, including himself, preferred getting up close and personal to hack and slash their enemies to bits, and they certainly enjoyed it. Unlike that Milksupabari, he hadn't entered the squad through the academy, not seeing any point in that crap like communing with your sword. He routinely tossed it aside and was happy that it was still an asauchi. If Captain Zaraki could get so strong without having some fancy name for his tool, then he could do without one as well. In the words of the Squad 11 third seat, he was a prideful idiot with nothing to back it up. Kitashi had been given this month-long assignment just a week ago, and he had been itching to fight some hollows. But nope. no hollows in sight since he got here. Now he was standing atop a light pole in one of the neighborhoods just looking for hollows the old-fashioned way. He began growling lowly in irritation at there not being any action, though before he blew up into a tirade, his soul pager started to go off signifying that someone from R&D was trying to get a hold of him. Most likely a con, the Squad 11 member fished out the little device. "Hey yeah, what is it? I'm getting stiff bored, you got something for me?" He shouted down the phone because the human nightlife wouldn't be able to see or hear him. Actually yes, it was a con as Katashi had guessed, a massive surge of some energy sprung up in the world of the living some weeks back, but we were unable to track it. Oh yeah, there was some strange spiritual energy he picked up a few minutes ago, though he didn't think much of it, since it was like a hollows or anything of the like, it just flared on our sensors not far from your position. Wait, he was finally going to do something to get rid of his boredom. "And I take it you want me to go take care of it?" Katashi asked in mild anticipation, not wanting to let the pencil pusher know how happy he was to be going to finally kill something. The con sighed on the other end, tanking Katashi's anticipation sadly. "What? No. We need you to go make contact with whom or whatever it was that flared that power. It's imperative that you find it and not kill it." Katashi hung his head as he ground his teeth. "Okay, fine, whatever, I'll go do it." "Wait, Dawn." Katashi hung up on a con as he quickly pulled up the info he had just been sent. Seemed that it wasn't far from here and over near the hills where there was a good view of the Tokyo metropolis. Putting away the soul pager, Katashi quickly made his way to the coordinates over the small town's rooftops. He was trying to learn the flash step, but sadly no one in his division, other than the whimsical lieutenant of theirs, Ikaku, Tsuzuman, Yumichika and Renji, knew how to use the technique, but he sure as hell wasn't going to go to them for pointers. He'd look like an idiot, so he'd prefer to get shit done on his own. Naruto. Ah. That hits the spot. Patting his stomach, Naruto had finished up with his dinner for the night as he got up to take care of his trash before going into town for a hotel for the night before he moved up north, time to get a bed for the night. Making his way out of the hillside towards the more populated area, Naruto caught sight of an oddity leaping over buildings towards him. He was garbed in a black kimono skirt and hakama with a sword tied to his white sash, wearing a pair of strawaraji sandals and white tabi. New as Naruto was to this world, he was quickly able to tell that this man didn't fit in with the society of today, perhaps linked to that strange creature that tried and failed miserably to ambush him. "Who the hell are you?" The man's eyes widened upon hearing Naruto addressing him as he landed a few feet from him. "Wait, you can see me?" "How the hell know what, never mind. You the one that flared some wicked energy a few minutes ago?" The black-garbed man all but demanded. Naruto narrowed his eyes, not sure just what the hell he had just stepped into, but he figured this might be the chance he had to get some info. Well, he had the opportunity. "Okay, before anything else happens in this weird as hell night, just who or what the hell are you, and what was that white masked bug I just killed?" His words got another reaction out of the man, as his eyes widened briefly in surprise before he started to chuckle, followed by keeling over in laughter. "You killed a hollow. A human. Ha. There's no way in hell you coulda done that. Ha 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 ha." Naruto's eyes twitched before the man started to calm down. "Haha, sorry about that, but I hadn't laughed my ass off in a while since the Soul Society first sent me to this boring town." He glanced back before turning back to Naruto as he kept talking. "But anyways, like I said, there's no way in hell a human coulda killed a hollow. That's a Shinigami's job, see the Zanpakuto?" The now identified Shinigami said as he pointed one hand to himself while the other patted the sword that was now identified on his left side. Even though the man clearly thought himself superior, he was an idiot. Every word he spoke gave Naruto more and more information that he wanted. The man was identifying himself as a Shinigami, and not the Shinigami that he was all too familiar with back home, along with telling him that the sword he was carrying was called a Zanpakuto. Presumptuous to call such an ordinary-looking blade a soul cutter, and then there was the name of that creature that attacked him, a hollow. Maybe that was fitting going by the massive hole that was located where he assumed the heart would have been. The Shinigami was inching closer towards him as he thumbed the first inch of the katana from its sheath. "Well anyways, if you're the one that made that flare, the Gate would like a few words, so I gotta take you in." Well, it looked like this would be twice in one night, he disappointed an idiot. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he removed his backpack before setting it down lightly, eyes remaining on that blade. To the blonde it seemed no different from a regular sword, rather ostentatious name aside, it was no different from any other sword he had seen wielded by shinobi or samurai. It was, however, curious that this so-called Shinigami held something similar to the energy of the hollow. This bore investigation. The Shinigami didn't look very strong, so he wasn't too overly concerned. "Sorry, but I didn't plan to spend my evening playing Ego Boost 2 to a drone," Naruto said as he made a small gesture to come hither, like he would when goading weaker opponents to just waltz into the ass kicking. "So, let's just get this over with." The Shinigami grew a significant tick mark at his temple and discarded all sense of his limited civility. "You little shit. I'll make you eat those words. I'll drag your carcass back to R&D to cut you open, but there might not be anything left of you when I'm finished." The Shinigami drew his blade and charged with his Zanpakuto raised high above his head in a rough kendo slash to cut Naruto stem to stern. Though the ninja half-stepped to the right when he saw the sword coming down towards his left side, hitting nothing but thin air. Kitashi's beady eyes flashed with annoyance that a lowly human could dodge his swing, but chalked it up to dumb luck on the blonde's part, renewing his assault with several practiced swings, stabs and slashes. The soul cutter would cut nothing but air in his frankly useless assault, for every telegraphed move of blade work fielded by the Squad 11 member was dodged without so much as a raised eyebrow from Naruto. "Stay still, you worthless human." Kitashi shouted in impotent rage when Naruto sidestepped one stab aimed for the liver before tapping the Shinigami on the head from behind. It was like fighting the wind or a swallow in flight, ever twisting and shifting position with the deftest of movements, and the longer it went on, the more Kitashi's ire entered the red zone. In a fit of rage he decided to lower himself with the exertion of Shinigami technique that he did not think the human deserved. Kitashi used Ichiho, a home technique to rapidly cross the distance between him and Naruto, bringing his Asauchi down on the blonde's shoulder with as much speed as he could muster. Curious if the blade could actually cut him, Naruto let the sword come down just enough to where it made contact with his skin. Now Naruto never intended to get any real wounds from the Zanpakuto. Instead, he would maneuver at the last moment to avoid taking any real damage. However, his thought process was derailed when the sword didn't break the skin, deflecting as if striking stone. How strange, he could see that despite being a generic blade, it had been sharpened and honed to a razor's edge, yet acted against his body like a blunted training sword or even a shinai. "Jaya." Kitashi yelped, the Shinigami's weapon simply bouncing back off Naruto's body like an empty bottle of water. No way, it bounced off like Madaram, and Captain Zaraki the Shinigami had started pointing his weapon at Naruto like he was some freak of nature. The Shinigami's ego was shattered by the weight of impossibility, leaving behind a simpering pup barking at the world to make up for his lack of bite. Well, that's all nice and interesting," Naruto said as he calmly approached the Shinigami who tripped over his own feet to lie flat on his backside, "but I think a dumbass like you shouldn't be swinging around a sword." Naruto kicked the Shinigami's chin, knocking him out cold in one swift stomp before he took the scabbard from his sash and the blank blade from where it had clattered to the ground. Hefting the sword up to sheath it, Naruto turned it around in his hands to get a feel for the balance. It was lighter than he expected, although it also felt as if the sword was in a sense a blank canvas. "I'm keeping you." Tucking the sheathed katana into his belt loop, Naruto retrieved his backpack before turning his gaze back to the Shinigami. "Now what to do with you, I wonder." He turned back to the town to see a nearby light pole and grinned as a particularly mischievous idea came to mind. "Yeah, let's do that." Sometime later, Kitashi groggily woke to a searing pain on his face as he eased out of unconsciousness. Where did that bastard get to? He quickly became aware that his feet weren't touching the ground and that strung him up by the underwear with his hands bound behind him, his body angled vertically to the ground. Kitashi looked down to see that he had been tied to a light pole and more importantly, his Zanpakuto had been stolen. God damn it. He was angry to be sure, but then a sense of dread came over him. Shit, they'll have my ass thrown to Squad 4 to this. If only he could read the sign that was stuck on his back. Suck it, losers. The Soul King Palace. Den, the Palace of Letsunameya. High above the white stone and red-tiled feudal metropolis of the Sirte existed a structure that was a sight to see to even the most jaded soul. Separated by some 50,000 kilometers from the ground below existed the domain of the world's linchpin, the Palace of the Soul King and his chosen champions. Hanging in the perpetually clear blue sky with no apparent suspension were 8 structures that were grand in scope and artistry, befitting of the purpose they served. The initial city of welcoming where the 1,000 or so divine soldiers and attendants of the Soul King lived, ate and slept. Atop a stone staircase of the vast blue road entrance, an observer would give a grand vista of the palace and its inhabitants. Beyond the initial structure of the vast blue road separated by a great yawning chasm of empty space were the other structures of the Soul King's palace, firstly the residences of the members of the Royal Guard. 5 discs of immaculate white marble some 45 kilometers across hanging sentinel in a pentagonal fashion at the same height, each covered in its own cityscape of varying design and style. Above all in the dead center of the Soul King's palace floated the Greater Soul King's palace, a cyclopean pillar of earthy-hued marble measuring 60 kilometers in height, turned slowly, its regimented floors and windows seeming to survey the rest of the palace from the vast blue road to the massive Siki perimeter wall that floated in place. All inhabitants of the palace lived with a single edict etched firmly in their hearts and minds to protect the Soul King, that there was no sacrifice too great and to think of anything beyond that was sin. But one such individual felt ill at ease. stood upon a barren and rocky outcropping of an otherwise exorbitant and glamorous casino-esque city the likes of a Sengoku Las Vegas. Letsu Namiya of the Royal Guard looked over the edge into the blue oblivion below. God of the sword and inventor of the Zanpakuto, Namiya's visage was not what one would associate with those given titles. A man of dark skin and average height, Namiya was clad in a heavily customized sleeveless shihakusho with shortened hakama, green undershirt and green slippers. He wore a pair of green-rimmed square sunglasses and had shaved his curly black hair on either side of his head before dyeing it green. He forewent a captain's haori for a white puffer jacket bearing the Squad Zero symbol. Letsu was a man of a humble lifestyle, even though he loved screwing around with people with that fake palace out front and all the Zanpakuto babes he made, but let it be known that he did take his job seriously, with keeping an eye on all his Zans. Well wad you know there you are my very strange man. His words were jovial and mixing between English and Japanese, a habit he had picked up at the dawn of the 1960s, but behind his sunglasses, Letsu's eyes were full of interest. Zanpakuto were something that he took pride in, and the creation of Asauchi was a duty he had to fulfill in action to his peers. As a result of the Asauchi being part of his domain as a god, he was aware of the location and current user of every single Zanpakuto in existence, from academy dropouts that had stolen Asauchi before bolting to Rukongai to the ones wielded by his fellow royal guards. So when he had felt a new hand take hold of an Asauchi, boy oh boy was he surprised to find the anomaly that had been of investigation from the others. Kiryu, being the scientific genius that she was, kept an eye on all that weird jazz that went down in the human world ever since she was elevated to the guard in 1891. Now, of course, this wasn't for some duty or anything since all she did now was make some damned good food and watch over the Soul King himself and all, but rather she got curious about the humans and what they did. When she had told the rest of the guard about an anomalous but also potently powerful presence appearing in the world of the living, it sure as hell got them interested in who or what it could be. However, they didn't have any way of looking for it, so Kiryu just tapped into the archives of those, in Letsu's mind, smug-ass idiots in Central 46, which no doubt will get that crazy clown-faced Mayuri, raising a haluva time looking for it through the rest of the Gate 13. He had thought at the time. To his surprise, he found out first instead. A blonde, whiskered kid named Naruto Uzumaki, and he wasn't from around these parts now that was interesting. You seem like a pretty chill guy, Mr. Fishcake, since you made a nice little show of that dud of a Shinigami, but I wonder if you can get one of my Zans to work for you. Yeah, this would be perhaps his best work without even lifting a finger. Though then again, he did have that damn duty of his, sorry though my man, but I gotta let the monk know about you. Shame, I would like to have asked you some pretty interesting questions. What questions would you have asked, Namiya? Letsu turned around to see the bulky, bearded form of Ichib Himsu behind him, with an inquisitive look on his face. I take it you found him. Letsu turned back around to look down into his forge, where he saw an image of the blonde checking into a hotel for the night, with the Asauchi tucked into his belt loop. Yeah, the kid's got some power in him. A lot if I'm guessing right. He didn't bother turning to Ichib who now stood next to him looking at the same thing. So what you wanna do about this Naruto Uzumaki? The monk who calls the name, like the other members of the guard, had an authority that set them above Shinigami into the realm of lesser deities, though, whereas Letsu's domain was of the Asauchi and Zanpakuto, Ichib's was the name. Words held power, to understand a name was to understand the power associated with it. Ichib hummed as he stroked his beard and thought, well, I can certainly feel that the weight of his name is quite heavy in fact. Many lifetimes he's been born and reborn almost as if he were the same person time and time again, only gaining more power with each life. Ichib brought forth his own Zanpakuto, Ichimonji, though he did not release it as he angled it down to the image. His soul could possibly upset the balance between the worlds, should he happen to die once again, a foreign body in the flow of souls impossible to be dismantled, so it should be prevented. The monk began to use a bit of his own power as he made a few strokes onto the image that held Naruto within it, though it's necessary for this to happen, I don't believe that this will be a solution for long. Perhaps one day I can remove it, should his soul change, but until then Nirvana shall be carved into it. As the image of Naruto now sleeping in his bed for the night, the kanji appeared on his back briefly in a bright light before fading away seconds later. For now though, he shall live as he is now for many years. Naruto. As Naruto began to fall asleep all nice and snuggled into bed with the extra sheets and blankets, since the place wasn't that great with its beds, he scratched his back a bit before feeling something. Despite feeling it occur, he paid it no mind. Sleep called. He answered. He'd figure it out later in the future, but right now, he had managed to get a map of the country, along with the various cities, towns and villages that had been marked up, along with some pamphlets of the various sites that tourists were told to visit among other things. The next day he found himself in the small town of Karakura not far from where he had been staying. Naruto had hoped to find a place to get some more supplies before heading up north and was able to do so, though now he was looking over the various places to head to first. So far nothing really screamed at him as amazing, nothing too good to see other than the bamboo forest outside of Sendai. I guess I can practice with my new sword there where no one'll bother me. Now he had a plan, only one problem, now the best way to get there. He had been walking on the sidewalk for a while now before he stopped a bit in front of a trio of girls heading home from school chatting with one another, but you like with Ricken, don't you? Being around him every day would definitely be exciting. I already told you, Rick is my cousin. Besides I don't look at him like that way. That's right. Even if they weren't cousins he's not Misaki's type. That's Shiho for you, she gets me. I can't believe you guys are even going there. Geez. Naruto was too focused on the map to figure out where he was attempting to go as the girls' voices were growing louder and closer. Oh you bet your ass I'm going there. Even if Ricken were my cousin, I'd gladly play with his joystick. Hanan, get your head out of the gutter. One of the girls was facing her friend's direction while she kept on walking as she was ignorant of Naruto who had stopped. Shiho, wash her mouth out with soap. She bumped into the ninja who had turned around to face her as she apologized. I'm so sorry. Naruto noticed her features. She wore a brown school uniform with a red hemmed skirt and a white collar with red pins that fell over the top of her back and was tied in the front with a red ribbon, as well as brown shoes and white knee-length stockings, just like her two accompanying friends. Her hair was cut to around chin length and held a healthy complexion of a teenager her age. Nah, it's fine. It's my fault for stopping in the middle of the walkway. Naruto was still trying to figure out the best way to get to Sendai, and since he was in front of someone who most likely knew the area best, he figured he might as well ask the teenager. Say, you wouldn't happen to know the best way to Sendai, would you? The teenage girl's eyes widened just a smidge before she smiled and replied, yep. The bus station on Hinata Corner just 2 streets down that way. She pointed back behind him before she gestured to the right. It'll take you through Tokyo and take the Shinkansen through to Sendai, no problem. Naruto smiled as he gave a slight wave to the girl. Thanks, I'm not too familiar with what's outside the wards and all, hope you have a nice day. The girl waved in kind as Naruto began to follow her directions to the bus station. I will, and you too, Mr. Yankee Whiskers. He nearly face-faulted before quickly adjusting himself to see that all three were giggling before they went down the left of the street they were previously on. Naruto shook his head as he kept on going towards his goal, while the high schoolers did the same while they gossiped about the interesting blonde. Did you see how bright his hair was? Yeah, but it has to be dyed right. He spoke good Japanese for a foreigner. I don't know about that myself, but it looked natural to me, and he looks half Japanese. Oh come on, Misaki, it had to be dyed. Plus, you have to admit he's a cutie. Misaki seemed to slightly blush a bit before she fought it down. He seemed kinda cute, but I don't know if he'd be my type honestly. Now we're back to talking about boys, can we talk about something else? As the girls and Naruto both went their separate ways, another person had felt a strange presence that both of them put off. Off to the side, the man was tall and lean, with light skin and gray eyes. His hair was messy and light blonde, almost pale, with strands framing the sides of the face and hanging between his eyes, and he had a chin stubble. He wore a dark green kimono shirt without an undershirt. Over this, he wore a short green haori, which sported a white diamond pattern along its bottom half. He also wore a pair of traditional Japanese jeta and a striped dark green and white bucket hat which shadowed his eyes. He eyed both the teenage girl named Misaki and the young man named Naruto as they both went their separate ways. To him, one felt that their soul was on the verge of potentially halofing, while the other held some very strong and possibly dangerous power. Most likely the one that he had felt several weeks ago that put him slightly on edge, so he's the one. Another time maybe. He turned back to the retreating form of Misaki as he felt the presence of hollow power rolling off of her, and if she was what he thought she was, then he'd need to deal with the situation quickly and under the right circumstances. Later that evening. Downtown Sendai. The city of Sendai was always alive with people going about their daily lives. The nightlife crowd was also something to behold with many gatherings for parties, clubs, shopping, dates, etc. A midnight tryst. A moonlit wandering. But also, there were those who were simply out for a nice walk through the city, be it simply just for that. A meeting with a murderer at a crossroads. Or something else to satiate oneself. The girl of about 15 years of age was walking alone as she talked to no one but herself. She wore a traditional honey-colored tomisode kimono that was of high quality, coupled with a pair of black zori and snow-white tabi. Over this, she wore a deep red-colored leather jacket that oddly blended well, despite the conflicting appearance of traditional Eastern and modern Western fashion, yet she made it look well to the eyes of many. She had ink black hair that was cut short just below her jawline, with pale skin color and black eyes that were a clear void. Full of mirth and interest, yet devoid of empathy. A genuinely cool beauty that would be described as the perfect Yamato Nadeshiko if she could be labeled as, had it not been for the leather jacket she wore. The girl looked to the sky as she felt the cool air breeze past her. If I disappear, she can live happily. At first, she had frowned at those words, before a small smile came up in satisfaction at such a statement. She turned down the alleyway as the urge began to rise slowly and needed to find one of those damned hollows to kill, to satiate her enjoyment in the act of murder. She began thinking on ways to end her empty existence, though a few that didn't involve her soul getting eaten came to mind. She wondered how she could accomplish such acts without killing her. Death doesn't scare me. But other things do. She continued down the alleyway as she frowned in her thoughts, the blue of the midday sky. The sunset after school. Things like that. The girl closed her eyes as she thought through much of what all occurred throughout her life. Her childhood being raised as the next heir to her family. Her grandfather's parting words before he died. The strange, yet also normal relationship she had with her. Hunting what satiated her desire for murder. The urge to kill was there, and she reveled in it every time she cut one of the cursed things up. But ultimately, it wasn't normal, and would no doubt lead to a life for her to have to clean up the messes that she made. Welcome. The voice of an elderly woman spoke up to her right, rousing the teen from her thoughts. Care to look at your future, young man? How odd. The woman had guessed right in how she spoke in a rather masculine tone and mannerisms, despite her gender being the opposite. The girl took a quick glance and remembered this woman from descriptions she would hear at school. The sister of Sendai. A fortune teller that could predict relationships of one's future, be they good or bad, and how could they hold together. A cheap parlor trick if anything. Oh. Then again, maybe this woman could satiate her desires just a tiny bit if she proved to be the real deal. Espers were under her family's purview after all. This should be interesting. The kimono-clad girl made her way towards the sister, her ancestral knife waiting in the folds of her kimono, ready to go for the jugular if the sister wasn't what she said she was. Her heart began to beat as the blood rushed through her body to make a quick and clean kill. She held her hand out for the old fortunatler to take like they did if they were fakes, though the slight crinkling of her knife echoed through the alleyway. Give my fortune. The sister stared at her outstretched palm for a few seconds before she gently took it with both hands. She felt around her palm, tracing the small details before staring back at the girl, though she did not say anything. Go on, tell me what you read. She slowly began to pull the knife out. If this turned out to be a phony, how do I avoid the terrible future that awaits me? The girl smirked, expecting something lovey-dovey and cheesy. Oddly enough, the sister lowered her head a bit before she continued tracing her fingers along the girl's palm. I suppose futures like yours exist. It's quite conflicting. Well, that was interesting. Maybe the sister wouldn't find her throat getting cut open. The girl tilted her head in confusion as she let up on her knife inside her pocket. Huh? The sister began to explain, you want to die. You want someone to live a happy life, yet you can't find a way to make it happen without hurting them. Well, color me surprised. The girl said in mild amazement, you're the real deal. It wasn't often that one encountered people like the sister. Those who could peer into the future and deliver some interesting fortunes. The girl began to pull her hand away before she felt that the sister was still holding on to her. Hey, aren't you done, though? You said my future was basically pure shit, right? She shrugged a bit as she tilted her head side to side like she didn't even care. It actually takes a load off my shoulders. There's more to it than that, young one. Oh? Now she was being called a young one as opposed to a young man. This was getting really interesting. I said one thing that leads to you merely dying. But there is something else. Well, now the sister had the girl's full attention. Stay as you are now, continue killing the creatures you so enjoy killing, and you will find nirvana. Once there, you will never find yourself wanting anything more, but that, as does she. Wait, so the girl had the choice to either go with her plan and kill herself to set her free, or stay alive and find something, some abstract happiness. That was a strange thing indeed, even as the woman continued on like she read her mind. Now you choose from this night on. Stay on the path that leads to your death, leaving her empty, broken. Or, choose the opposite, live and find joy in the world as full as you and she are. There will be someone there to walk side by side with you both. Never again to feel the void as you are now. What a fortune to be told. On some level, she supposed that she did enjoy some things in the world, while she was afraid of other things, as she mentioned aloud to no one in particular but herself. But to keep going with someone that was like her and her, if there was any indication of such a possibility in the sister's words. Then maybe, just maybe, she could continue living until they both found that happiness. The sister let go of the girl's palm as she turned around with a smile on her face and the decision made. Goodbye, sister. I hope you live a long life. She turned back halfway to glance at the sister to offer some more words. These streets are dangerous at night. They're no place for the elderly. The sister of Sendai merely chuckled without saying a word as the girl left back out onto the main streets of Sendai towards her home, having some fulfillment made tonight. True, she had not been able to sink her knife into a pound of flesh tonight, and yet she felt at ease was it. The girl eventually made her way down by the riverbank onto the road back to her family estate, passing by the bamboo forest the city was well known for, all the while contemplating the sister's words, so, if I choose death, then things won't be as nice. But if I choose life, then someone'll come along to make us both happy somehow, huh? I see. She halted her feet as she gazed up to the sky, wondering if that massive surge of energy she felt months ago was perhaps responsible for this potential change in fate. I wonder maybe either way, that'll be nice then. The girl had chosen life. She smiled at the choice, yeah, I think I'll do that then. This perhaps would be the choice that would pay off more than what she originally had planned. As she continued on back home, only this time she decided to skip to a little tune singing in the rain, however, this nice little moment was cut short as she heard an inhuman roar off in the distance. She halted her tune and skipping as she focused in on its location. She grew a sadistic smile as she brought her knife out with a twirl, a hollow. I guess I do get to kill something tonight, then, huh? Just my luck. I get two happy things tonight. She quickly ran out towards the hollow that appeared in her city, as per her inherited job, but also a hobby to satiate her desire to murder the inhuman souls that devoured others. What a joy it always was for the girl to murder hollows. Next. The girl that sees death. And done. Now, of course, this is just a prologue, so it's not quite so long as usual. Initially, there was going to be an extra scene, but I felt that this was enough for a prologue into the story. Any more might have bogged the pacing down and been hard going. But the pairing, don't ask me if it's with a Bleach character, because it's already been decided on. She appeared in this last section of the prologue with her backstory here, having been modified from Type Moon to fit into the world and history of Bleach. Speaking of pairings and the other member of the Big 00 shonen trio, Ichigo will be paired with Rukia and Rukia only. I stand by their pairing being more set up and making more sense than Orihime, but I'm not gonna start a war over a 4-year-old argument. So it's Naruto Type Moon character shown here and Ichitsuki for certain, and that won't change at all. Now, onto Naruto possessing his Zanpakuto. At first I was against the idea, since many fics just merely use crappy, cookie-cutter Zans that have the same abilities, generic Zan spirits and names, that all link back to Wind or Kurama, which yes it's Naruto's main element, but come on, at least be original with it. But I was talked into it by a friend, and so Naruto has a Zan, but it won't even be like anything else done before. I like my Naruto to be ninja A, but I suppose that's no excuse to not expand his arsenal. Naruto will be on his own, away from the main Bleach cast at this time period, and stick mainly with his pairing girl, in which she teaches him a lot more about the world that he now lives in. So, don't expect him to be all buddy-buddy with Kisuke so soon. In fact, that won't happen for a very long time if he even begins to trust the guy, and even then, Naruto will be hesitant to even trust him. Since it seems that the majority of you already worked out who the romantic pairing is, in part due to me being silly and the original image for this story being of her, I can only comment that I'm hoping she mixes up the story in just the right way, as her personality is going to be in stark contrast to Naruto's own. Well, anyway, this will be where Naruto's life takes another turn and into the deeper parts of the supernatural world within Bleach, seeing the human perspective of it. Looking at the world of Bleach during the Substitute arc, Kubo clearly intended to build up more of the world, other than just the Soul Society, Hollows, Quincy, etc., but he never got around to doing so, due to the Arankura arc essentially railroading the plot post-Soul Society. You can clearly see plot points and things that he wanted to develop, but had to cast aside due to the way the story was told. There's a world that Kubo created, and it feels a lot like something that DxD has, but the surface was barely scratched, so here I'll be digging in a little deeper with the human aspect of the supernatural. Speaking of my DxD fic, it's still going on, but I've had to go through the long process of a rewrite of the synopsis of the story's first arc, as it was a little too similar to another story. The prologue has been posted if you guys are interested in it. Now, onto the reviews that I wasn't able to respond to properly or PM. Est, May 22nd. Thanks, if you have a guess, well then, you'll find out in this chapter. Est, May 22nd. Neither are very original, dude. I've grown tired of seeing said characters be a Zan spirit or something, especially when they were merely mentioned in passing in the original story. Kurosaki Naruto, I didn't impose this story on the old one was simply flawed, and my own tastes in stories and writing skills have changed since I wrote that up. As for Shiki, she's not so much an Ak as she is from a different anime, but I've rewritten her backstory to accommodate her history in Bleach, as she also brings in a different perspective than the other female characters have. To me, the women of Bleach have grown rather stale as far as pairings go, and some I feel just wouldn't do well with Naruto. My beta disagrees, but it's just how I feel. Est, May 23rd. Glad to see that you edited her, although I've never seen her used before now with a pairing for Naruto. As for Naruto being able to gather Reishi, you'll just have to wait and see in future chapters. Best, May 29th. Ah, yes, in Rakuten. I know of that Zan, but there's no way possible for Naruto to even use or obtain it. Best, July 10th. You got it right, my man, and glad to hear you've watched the first 2 parts of her story, though I assume by now you've seen them all, including Future Gospel. For Gundam, thanks. From what I can tell, this will likely be the first pairing with Shiki and Naruto on this side, as I have yet to see it anywhere. As for the other characters from KNK, some will show up, while others will not, sad to say. One certainly will, and she'll play a significant role with the development of Naruto, Shiki, as well as Rukia herself, come time for the manga storyline to start up. As for which part of Shiki that Naruto ends up with, you'll be in for a surprise, as I expect everyone will be once their development begins to take a turn for the more romantic side. As for Shiki's abilities, you'll just have to wait and see how they're explained, but they have remained relatively the same from her canon set. Best, August 27th. Yes. Shiki is indeed scary when she wants to be. But other times, rare times mostly, she'll turn into a cinnamon roll if she's comfortable around certain people. Anon, August 7th. No need to go that far, dude. Now, on with the story in the first official chapter. Chapter 1, The Girl That Sees Death. Sendai, early July. 1984. So, why exactly have you grown attached to this thing? I dunno, I guess I felt something drawing me to it for some reason. After a speedy trek through outlying prefectures, the ninja and fox duo had made it to Sendai. Thanks to the young girl's directions, Naruto found himself sightseeing around the city, taking in the juxtaposition between contemporary urbanization that dominated the heart of the city and the old-style mansions that were grouped together towards the outskirts. Moreover, he enjoyed seeing the cherry blossom trees that filled the fields on his way into town. He had made a mental note to spend some alone time reading up on Japan under the cherry trees. While he was more eager to learn about this world through travel and experience, Naruto would be a fool not to do some reading when he had the time. Having gotten a room for the night, Naruto had ventured out to the forests near the city to practice with his new sword that he took from the so-called Shinigami at first. He was initially just going to toss it away, or maybe even sell it if he could. After all, he had never been all that interested in Kenjutsu. The following day his interest in the seemingly banal strip of folded metal had taken a marked increase when he had noticed something odd. No one could see it. Not that they saw it and simply ignored why the young man was toting a deadly weapon around or even muttered assumptions that he was some kind of cosplayer. It was as if the near meter of steel simply didn't exist. He had been sitting at the scantily populated breakfast bar of the hotel early in the morning, with a sheathed blade propped against his table, while he wiped the sleep from his eyes when he had seen the waitress approach him. Initially assuming that she was about to tell him off for having a sword at the table, he was surprised when she simply leaned forwards, her hand passing through the black diamond-patterned hilt to refill his coffee. Popping openly at the bizarre occurrence that had unfolded before him, the blonde had been forced to sputter an excuse of drowsiness when the waitress had assumed that she had somehow offended him with her service. After resolving the issue, she had laughed to herself that he was suffering jet lag, confusing Naruto who had little concept of the condition. Alas, soon enough, he had made his way briskly to the forests outside of town to experiment, keeping the sword on full display to see if the waitress's inadvertent magic act had been a fluke. That was quashed quickly under the dawning realization that he had not encountered a single person in the walk to the forest that could see or even interact with the sword, a prospect that set his features in an excited grin. Traveling deep into the forest until the tall maples had yielded to scores of dark green bamboo, Naruto had set about testing just what made the blade so odd, despite its otherwise normal appearance. What Naruto had discovered was both exciting and confusing all at once. The sword was no heavier or lighter than any sword he had ever held. It could interact with the physical world, as evidenced by the litany of tall bamboo shafts he had felled in the hour since he had begun to experiment. It cast a shadow and even produced a smell, but all the same, it seemed that no human or animal he had encountered yet, other than the black-clad ne'er-do-well he had pinched it from, could see or touch it. In the days of yore, Naruto would have chalked this all up to some cosmic fluke and gone to Kakashi or Sakura for an explanation that he would find interesting, but inevitably find no practical application for. But as he swung the sword in repeated movements of a rough kata, the blue-eyed Uzumaki could not deny that he felt a certain attraction to the prospect of keeping the blade, and so in a spur-of-the-moment decision he had chosen to keep it around. Naruto wasn't going to pass up on the possibility of a new skill, especially after recalling how the Shinigami said the sword was necessary for killing those creatures he called hollows. Besides, Naruto said as he brought down the sword in an overhead slash, it never hurts to expand one's arsenal of skills. He gritted his teeth, feeling the sword slip in his hands, its unfamiliar weight and weight worlds different from the thin and light kunai he was used to. If I recall correctly, you initially refused to learn Kenjutsu. One time, Jiraiya had brought the subject up on their training trip, but after thinking about it, you said you'd likely cut your own head off and just stuck to kunai and shuriken instead. It was entertaining to see how the blonde tried to hold a sword properly several times before tossing it away in frustration. Naruto grumbled a bit before retrieving the sword and taking another swing to get used to it. Kurama was right, though. Initially, he rejected learning how to use a sword. That had all changed upon his first encounter with Sasuke after the botched operation at Tenchi Bridge. The way the avenging Uchiha had used the Chikoto as an extension of himself had been an awe-inspiring prospect that none of them had been ready for. He had considered asking around to inquire about an instructor, but he had quickly become sidetracked with developing the Rasen Shuriken and soon after the death of Jiraiya. Now though, faced with a world that was still very foreign to him with many differing agendas of different peoples, he would need to keep his edge up for whatever lay in the future. There was also another thing that had been on his mind since he arrived though. I get the feeling that my sage mode's been on semi-autopilot since my first night here. Upon using his senjutsu to find civilization after arriving here, Naruto knew that the nature of this world felt similar but different from his home. Still, after repeating the process on the second day, he concluded that there was something in the air that was just so abstract. It was like an ambient diluted energy permeated everything from the mysterious sword to the individual molecules of oxygen that made up the air he was breathing. After dropping Sage Mode, Naruto was surprised that the heightened sensory state did not leave his senses, instead maintaining an awareness of the movements and concentrations of this odd energy as far away as a few kilometers from him. His attention had been shifted when a different, darker and more putrid form of that energy leapt on the edge of his senses, followed by a haunting, drawn-out roar that had echoed over Sendai. It hadn't taken Naruto long to realize it was another hollow, and he had traveled towards it with all due haste, hopping across rooftops until finally laying his eyes on the white masked and pill bug-shaped beast, menacing a group of pedestrians who ran around in confusion. Naruto had jumped down from the roof of the 4-story building he had been perched atop and buried the length of the sword into the hollow's unsuspecting head in a messy but effective stab that sent it keeling over with nary a death wail. Naruto had watched in morbid interest as the thing had disintegrated before him, breaking down into black particles of that odd energy that visibly boiled away with a hiss. Until there was nothing there but a street full of half a dozen confused and panicked pedestrians grousing about a gas leak. To his surprise, it was readily apparent that while the effect of the hollow had been an unavoidable occurrence, what with the craters in the walls and ground where it had stomped and thrashed before eventually falling in death, the people of this world could see the hollows as well as they could see his sword, that is to say not at all. All of this information and experience spawned myriad questions in Naruto's waking mind, questions he was determined to find answers to, and if he expanded his skills in the process, then that was all the better. As the hours ticked by into the afternoon and the spring sun began its waning descent towards the western horizon, Naruto concluded his experimentation with the sword. While he could hardly even call himself a beginner with a weapon, he was confident he could now swing it without it slipping from his hands and nailing some unsuspecting bamboo. Sheathing the sword and sealing it away, he dropped to his haunches and began to fall into sage mode, feeling his awareness of this world and its energies open up like the curtains on opening a play. A strange energy washed over him like a cool stream of bluish-white water, abject in that he recognized it for its difference to all that he knew. Better see if I can use whatever this stuff is to my advantage. He could feel the native life in the forest, be they the tiniest of insects, the fish and salamanders that lived in the streams, and even the deer that roamed the land. They breathed as one, a hum of life that burbled above his 5 senses far into the kilometers of the forest ahead of him. He tuned out the overabundance of life from the city proper and chose instead to center himself in the comparatively quieter forest's life energy. As for the other power, Naruto began to get a feel for it, feeling more fluid and lighter than the treacle-esque consistency of natural energy. It was almost like pouring ice water into a body that had been overexerted from heat and cooling it down. Concentrating on this stream, he realized why he found it to be so uncanny compared to chakra. It was similar to a component. If chakra was green, then this energy felt blue, far removed from the former, but still an undeniable element when mixed with another. Wow, this is a. At the edges of his senses, a feeling of darkness and keening hunger pinged in for warning when the cry of a hollow echoed in the far distance. Guess I need to go put down another one. Standing quickly before leaping up into the tree line, Naruto darted through the forest as soon as he could in the direction of the hollow's signature. The wind rushed through his ears, his jacket fluttering around him, while he leapt between the tops of bamboo shoots and tree branches, strong enough to support his weight, all but flying through the quickly thickening forest depths. The blonde's feet barely disturbed the treetops when bouncing from one to the other, each superhuman movement covering 100 feet with no effort. As Naruto grew closer to his target, he felt a new signature was close by, similar to the regular people that he had been feeling for since the blonde had arrived here. only several orders of magnitude above the trace energies he picked up from Sendai's populace and fundamentally different in its makeup. It was darker and heavier than a regular person's energy, but held none of the malice or negative emotion of the hollow, which at this distance he realized was agitated, power flickering and fluctuating like a fire caught in a strong wind. By comparison, the interloper's power felt controlled, lashing out in precise and subtle strata of unseen preeminence that Naruto recognized as the calm collection of battle. By now, he was close enough that he could pick out the negative emotions of the hollow quite clearly. Anger, annoyance, hunger, greed, and arrogance were at the forefront of the invisible wave, but with steady progress, new emotions began to tinge the aura. Confusion, frustration, pain and above all, fear. Sharply contrasted by the beginnings of vicious excitement and boredom from the one who likely combated the beast. Unsure about the situation, Naruto decided to slow down a bit until he finally landed atop a tree branch overlooking a wide clearing in the forest. The vantage point gave Naruto the perfect view of the grassy verge ringed by bamboo, beams of golden afternoon sunshine, casting long thin shadows that laid an umbral lattice over the vista. Two beings stood opposite one another, separated by a few meters. A teenage girl in a blue kimono and red leather jacket stood fearlessly before the gorilla-like hollow with a knife in hand. Her breathing was slow and measured in contrast to the simian hollow that panted in exhaustion, clutching the bloodied stump of an arm with its remaining hand while glaring balefully at the young woman. Naruto was tempted to jump into the fray and help the young woman, but reconsidered it after surveying the battlefield. She appeared to be the picture of health and vitality. Despite the displayed anger, Naruto could sense that the ape was terrified of her. She was almost certainly the one that had relieved it of its arm, the furry white limb Naruto spotted lying in quarters half a dozen meters behind the young woman. It didn't take a rocket scientist to see that given the combination of her energy that at this distance, Naruto realized to be suppressed, the state of the battlefield and condition of the monster that the girl was in no real trouble. It was more than that, though, Naruto realized, it was the way the young woman carried herself, legs slightly bent but stance still loose, a confidence that was not boasting, and a palpable eagerness to do battle that any who had stepped foot on the battlefield would know. Staring down the hollow with a piercing stare, the knife-wielding young woman made no sign that she would be the one to initiate the attack, so with half bravado and bruised pride, the ape let out an angry roar before thumping its chest with its remaining arm. It bounded towards the young woman with animalistic fury, the underbrush torn asunder when the hollow's lumbering limbs smashed into it as it crossed the distance to the static woman. There was only a meter's gap between them when with shocking swiftness, she moved. Dropping low, the young woman kicked off the ground and sailed past the hollow when it raised its remaining arm to smash her skull in. Still in motion, she twisted, pirouetting along the horizontal plane like a corkscrew and leaving no less than 12 deep slashes in the hollow's left side that gushed with blood. Her hand shot up from the spin and hooked the stump of the ape's arm, strengthening up and letting the momentum carry her up to loop around the stump as if it were a swing bar, her knife a streak of white light that circled the limb before it unceremoniously exploded off of the beast's body at the shoulder. She wasn't done. Her initial momentum had not been entirely arrested by the sudden change in orientation. Turning in the air above the howling hollow's head, the black-haired warrior landed on its broad-muscled shoulders, her thighs locking securely around its elongated head. The knife twirled in her right hand, its brass pommel and guard glinting in the afternoon sun, before she plunged it inwards into one of the two eyeholes of the mask the hollow wore. The inhuman scream of pain, anger and fear that rent the air sent a flock of birds screeching into the air from the forest around Naruto. A geyser of blood splashed rain from the hole that the knife still stuck from, held there by a pale hand unflinchingly. The rivulets of sanguine liquid painted a bloody tear down the porcelain white mask, and Naruto briefly saw a flash in the girl's eyes when he saw her face for a moment, her features set in grim satisfaction. The ape's garbled curse was unintelligible, lost amidst a tempest of pain from its new grievous injuries. It had the scantest sense to try to remove the cause, a meaty fist the size of a garbage can swung back towards the attacker. The woman didn't panic at the punch whirling towards her with a speed that would have caved a regular human's chest in. She swiftly ripped the knife out of the hollow's now mutilated eye socket and flipped backwards off of the ape who hit nothing but air, howling in confused pain when a last-minute twist of the knife from the woman alleviated the simian's last remaining thumb at the second knuckle. Landing in a crouch, she swiftly backpedaled to avoid the falling body of the hollow, whose punch had knocked it off balance. She could have ended the fight there but didn't, instead waiting for the hollow to flounder on the ground in impotent rage before its one remaining eye saw her again and it dragged itself to its feet. Naruto watched on in morbid fascination of the battle and the young woman who continued to effortlessly cut the hollow to ribbons. His observation let him in on a few revelations about both the girl and the way she fought. The first was that she had an absurd level of skill with her knife. While Naruto was no sword master, he was very good with kunai and could say that she was up there with those he knew to be savants with an edged weapon in terms of pure technical skill. Secondly was that her style and the results it yielded were utterly bizarre. There was no sequences or kata, no specific moves or rehearsed school of fighting. It was a skill that was as fluid as a running river and only broke when she gave herself space to breath. It was like she was aiming for specific points on the ape, dexterously sliding from one point to another in search of something only her eyes could see. And when the young woman did hit whatever it was, she was rewarded with squalls of gore and perfect cuts even a surgeon would feel jealous of. That knife is nowhere near big enough to take off limbs, and yet she's picking him apart like someone playing with their foot. This is sport. Naruto realized the young woman was deliberately foregoing obvious kill shots to extend the fight, and if the look of slowly rising boredom on her face was any indication, that sport was about to reach its inevitable conclusion. Still, just what was she doing to yield such results? Well, that power roiled through her, it was suppressed to an incredible degree, and was not going into the knife that flashed in hundreds of arcs and stabs per minute. "Who are you?" he wondered. The young woman sighed. The hollow at this point had no arms and was missing a foot, her entertainment exhausted. She walked forwards purposefully and traced a small cut at the nape of the pain-drunk hollow's neck. It was silenced as its head came tumbling forwards to roll across the ground dead. Briefly looking down at the blood-slicked instrument of death, she flicked it down to the ground as the blood was flung off by the act, while the hollow vanished into a series of white particles floating into the air. Naruto had to admit that he was impressed by this girl and what she had just done. He noticed that there was a distinctive difference between the way the hollow had died and what he had witnessed before from the other two. Initially, Naruto just flared his chakra to kill the first one that he encountered, and it dissipated slowly into a series of black and white particulates haphazardly. The second one he had stabbed with the sword had its black particles boiled away in a hiss, but the white particles the late ape had vanished into was something completely different. How did she do that? And so easily? Naruto thought to himself. So far, he hadn't seen any sign of humans having the capacity to kill these hollows. That much maligned Shinigami had boasted that only his ilk could kill them. He had too many questions and too little information. Careful, Kurama spoke in a cautious tone. I doubt you'll get answers if you provoke a fight. She's different from you, the hollows, and that Shinigami you met. Something was off about this girl, that much he could tell. Other than being able to kill those bleach-faced suckers, how? Intuition, there is something deeply wrong with this one. Kurama advised, his words slow as if trying to find the right ones to describe the situation. No, not wrong. Just different, and I don't like not knowing what I'm looking at. For whatever reason, the girl's presence had Kurama on edge, yet Naruto couldn't see what had the fox's hackles up. Sure, it looked like she just put that thing in the ground, or whatever, like a chef carving up a turkey, but he didn't feel anything truly threatening from her. The absence of malice in her actions was a change of pace from what he was used to, but there was that eagerness under the surface he knew from someone who wanted a good fight. Naruto had to admit that he knew comparatively nothing about the hollows and Shinigami, and given how the young woman killed one as a formality rather than in surprise, it stood to reason that she may have the answers to his questions. In a spur-of-the-moment decision, he allowed the built-up senjutsu to leave his body, eyes shifting back to blue as the natural energy left him, and his signature became untangled from nature's background aura. The senjutsu was barely halfway out of him when the girl sensed him, snapping around with the knife pointed directly at him, giving him a good view of her facial features. At first glance, her features lined up with the ideal Yamato Nadeshiko, yet her aura presented her as a cool beauty, undeterred by what came at her. Though it was those steely eyes, those strangely colored eyes of hers that focused intently on him like a hawk watching prey. Her iris was a bright blue that began to change into a radiating violet as it reached the pupil before it appeared to almost seamlessly merge with the blackness, like a void swallowing in any light. A chill ran up Naruto's back feeling those eyes on him, an all too human feeling that there was something huge surveilling him that he could not see, the scantest inklings of it peeking out from those strangely dead but frighteningly vivid eyes. Seeing that it was best to be friendly and not invite a conflict when it wasn't needed, Naruto stepped off of the tree branch and dropped 20 feet to introduce himself to the girl. Hey, how's it going? He could hear Kurama just sigh at the pitiful introduction. The girl said nothing, the tip of her knife had tracked his fall with an unerring precision, while her gaze stayed locked onto his. Naruto held his hands up to give her a view that he wasn't armed, save for the kunai holster that strapped to his side. Hey, so I'm not an enemy here, you know. He said to the girl placatingly, hoping she wouldn't drive that knife into him like that hollow before. She didn't relax at his words, instead narrowing her eyes dangerously. What did you see? She demanded frigidly. The air around her gained a chill while her body grew tense, preparing to make a move depending on Naruto's answer. There it was again, the lack of killing intent that was so alien to Naruto. He tensed to take a step back in preparation, something she seemed to catch, given her grip on the knife tightened. Well, I saw you kill one of those hollow things, and I got curious as to how you did it. She didn't reply, continuing to regard him with calculating interest while the approaching evening wind rustled her black hair around her face. Quixotic as it may be, he had hoped that maybe she could be a little forthcoming with some information about that, but it seemed to be a moot point when the girl shut her eyes and lowered her weapon entirely before she pocketed the knife and turned her back to him. "Piss off and forget what you saw here," the girl said in annoyance. She turned on her heel sharply, a crackle of green energy manifested at her feet before she blurred away with a high-pitched plop, disappearing into the tree line. The blonde's eyes widened at the sudden turn of speed. Had he been an average human, then it would have seemed like she vanished, but he had been able to witness her accelerate to a shocking speed before leaving. It was like a body flicker, only more subtle and faster. Now that was interesting, the girl clearly was ready to attack him, yet she had instead opted to dismiss him before speeding off with some form of high-speed maneuvering technique he had never seen before. Left alone in the clearing with his thoughts, Naruto contemplated his next action. It seemed like she was reluctant to part with her information, but so far, she was the most viable source of info that hadn't tried to swing a sword at him. Naruto was left with little choice. "Gonna follow her, aren't you?" Kurama asked, trying hard to tamp down on the headache building at the back of his skull. Folding his arms behind his head, Naruto grinned sheepishly. "Yup. She's the only that I've met so far that probably knows what it is that I've been seeing and dealing with those hollows, and then there's this." As Naruto glanced at the seal where his new sword was stored, "This sword from that Shinigami. He claimed that only with that could hollows be killed, yet I did it just by flaring my chakra, and then she did it with a knife, but their deaths look different from one another." Naruto leapt up into the tree line as he allowed some distance to build between himself and the girl. She obviously had some form of sensory perception like him, so it was best to keep himself at a distance that he could sense her, but not the other way around. "There's just too many questions I've got, and I'm not about to go searching for another Shinigami. There are too many risks with that." Kurama sighed a bit at his partner's logic, seeing that he was right in it all. "Just be careful. Those eyes of hers, they weren't natural. It was like a separate presence altogether. A Dijutsu? Like the Rinnegan or Kagaya's third eye. More the latter, and there's no telling if it's even Dijutsu. Could be something else entirely. New world, new rules. Just have a plan in place in case things go wrong." Kurama did bring up a point. He had been drawn to the presence of those eyes. It went beyond the concentration of energy of the eyes, but the aura that pushed against his waking mind. She had been utterly unflapped by the fact that he had been able to get so close to her without noticing, and the confidence with which she had disregarded him wasn't hubris. It was an assurance that she felt if he did act up that she could kill him without a second thought. The intelligent and rational part of Naruto's mind wanted to discard that prospect out of hand. The memory of the Shinigami's sword bouncing off his chest was still fresh in his mind, but Naruto had to remind himself that much like how she didn't know the scope of his powers, he did not know the particulars of hers. A curious conundrum for the killer young woman, her scowl seemed to come naturally to her despite her beauty. Begging to hop between tree branches once again, Naruto asked himself, "Why do I always seem to gravitate towards women with sour attitudes?" Kurama could only snort in amusement, uncanny luck and a room temperature IQ. Sometime later. Elsewhere. "It was just another hollow on the outskirts of the city. I took care of it, though some guy happened to see it. There was a witness. He was harmless, so I told him to forget what he saw. He was spiritually aware enough to see the hollow, so no real harm." After returning to her family's estate shortly after night had fallen, the girl had to deliver her nightly report to Akataka Suzurigi, her butler in a sense, to ensure records were kept of every hollow they encountered in the region as per her duty. She lazed in a chair adjacent to Akataka's desk that was filled with paperwork, along with various pictures of the austere-looking man in his youth, surrounded by men dressed in similar black suits. His office was surprisingly large given the clutter of the desk. It backed onto a moderately sized walled garden on the southeastern tip of the compound. The shoji slid open to let the spring night air into the office lit by warm globe lights. Akataka's desk faced outwards towards the open garden, while the girl kept her back to it, her red leather jacket gone. Akataka hummed in thought before he spoke up, "I'm sure you know what will happen to this man if the Shinigami apprehend him, Lady Shiki." He did not come across as reprimanding, merely reminding his charge, Shiki Ryugi, of what her choices could bring down on them. He was in charge of ensuring she was prepared for her future role as the family head. However, the girl scrunched her eyebrows in minor frustration as her gaze lingered down to her knees. Of course, she knew what would happen if the Shinigami found and took him in. A beating for information he didn't have and his memory scrubbed of anything useful. What she knew Akataka was worried about was if she had left anything that would prompt the Shinigami to restore the balance. "I know well enough, Akataka. But he didn't strike me as someone squeamish if he saw me kill a hollow." As she raised her head to face her caretaker, she caught him looking past her with an analytical air, lips pressed into a thin line. Lady Shiki, this boy Akataka said, Shiki's ears pricking up at the assumption she hadn't told him of the guy's age. Would he happen to have blonde hair and whiskers on his cheeks? She quirked a brow at that, nodding slowly, yes. And was he wearing a black shirt, grey shorts and a pair of orange shoes? Yes, Shiki's face was bordering on incredulous at this point. And he had a large backpack slung over his shoulder. Yes, where are you going with this? Well, now she really wanted to know how in the hell Akataka was able to describe him down to the details that she saw earlier. As far as she knew, Akataka wasn't a clairvoyant. Oddly enough, Akataka didn't say a word until he raised his right hand and pointed past her to the garden beyond the open shoji doors. Turning around, Shiki was unprepared to see the very same blonde boy sitting in the tree right outside the wall waving at them lazily, eyes now yellow with bar pupils and red eyeshadow. Yo. Shiki was caught off guard entirely by the blonde following her back without her even sensing him, which was odd as she caught no trace of his spirit energy or spiritual pressure. Even the weakest spiritually aware people had a minute amount of either, yet she couldn't tell anything about him. It was like looking at one of those optical illusions in the morning paper, where something was wrong without being readily apparent. Immediately getting out of her seat, Shiki practically stomped onto the wooden veranda in irritation. What do you want? The blonde didn't flinch from her outburst as he just blinked before he spoke up, some answers would be nice. So, he still wanted to know how she killed the hollow. Glaring at the blonde and his casual dismissal of her ire, Shiki could see that the blonde wouldn't leave her alone until he got what he wanted, and seeing that he wasn't like other spiritually aware people, such as herself or those that they knew of. She watched him silently as his eyes shifted back to blue, and she felt his aura again, giving her pause at how different it was to the few other espers she had encountered. Odd, just how long had it been since their organization had more than a handful of espers? They were a dying breed with so few living long enough before getting blotted out. Killing hollows on her own had become annoying because of how pathetically weak the ones here in Sendai were, but she wouldn't deny that she enjoyed killing them. Head to the front door like a proper person, idiot. Slamming the shoji shut, Shiki left Akataka's office, who promptly followed behind while casually pulling a Glock from the desk and stowing it in a shoulder holster under his suit jacket. He pulled a walkie-talkie from his belt and messaged the other staff in the estate for their late-night arrival. He would have Shiki's father and mother notified as well. The man may have shifted most of his pursuits to the mundane, but he still needed to be informed of matters like this. However, he made a mental note to hire a tree surgeon about cutting that tree branch down. Naruto. Well, this is nice. Having tracked the girl back to her home, or rather a large estate, he did not expect her to come from money, gonna be honest, was kind of expecting a mountain shack. It would have taken me over 4 dozen S-rank missions to get the money to buy a place like this. Although Naruto had to wonder if maybe the Ryo of his world was somehow something that he could try to invest in converting to the yen of this world. He doubted it, but at least the coinage was made of metal, and if it was metal, then he could trade it as scrap. Strangely enough, according to a book he had read in his hotel's lobby, Japan once had a currency called Ryo, just as his world did. In all seriousness, the estate was massive, with various houses surrounded by a high wall that reached 6 feet in height that went around a good portion of land. The large koi pond and a garden of various flora were arranged in a combination of akabana and sandstone gardens. A few minutes after the girl had slammed the door on him, she and her butler had made their way to his tree and escorted him to the main entrance. Naruto had been led inside the rather elegant estate to a training room which he now sat in the center of. A few men in some rather nice suits sat on either side of the room, eyeing him with businesslike interest. Bulges at ankles and armpits told Naruto they were armed. No doubt they were guards hired on by her family, which wasn't unwarranted in this situation, given his less than tactful entrance. Making himself comfortable on the tatami mat, he soon heard the sliding of the door behind him open and close. He peered behind him to see that the girl had come before planting herself 4 feet from himself. "Can you give me your wallet?" she asked in a no-nonsense tone. If she was asking for his wallet, then no doubt they were looking for some kind of ID, fat chance of that happening. Naruto thought to himself, although he saw no problem in giving his name, since it didn't matter at all, although, if I'm giving you my name, then it's only right that you give me yours. It was only fair and all since he simply wanted answers, and he didn't want to just call her girl. It didn't sound like the best way to build up confidence in him. Kurama resisted the urge to point out that Naruto was a hypocrite who had called the Six-Path Super Sage Gramps. She regarded him with a small measure of decorum. Maybe she thought slightly more of him as a result. Shiki Ryugi. Now, your name? Naruto Uzumaki. Nice to meet you, Shiki. He would have held his hand out for her to take, but this wasn't one of those situations, nor did she strike Naruto as the kind of girl for such things under these circumstances. But hey, he had to at least try to be cordial to her as much as possible. As soon as he gave his name, he noticed one of the men made their way out of the room, most likely to find information on him. "So, how'd you kill that hollow, exactly?" Shaiki chewed the inside of the cheek as she scrutinized him in silence, deciding if he was being earnest in his desire for information or if it was some kind of ploy. Eventually, her right hand reached behind her and withdrew the knife she had used to kill the hollow and held it up for Naruto to see. The knife was roughly the length of a carving knife but was much thicker in the blade. It was sharpened to a razor's edge and had a groove cut into it to allow it to easily slip in and out of the flesh that it rent. The handle was ergonomically designed and wrapped in dark red leather between a thick brass guard and pommel. This knife is unique in that it was made from special materials and blessed to purify hollows rather than outright destroy them. She placed the knife back behind her into its sheath before Shaiki took her turn to ask a question of her own. "You sound like you've never heard of hollows until recently." "Well, I'm not exactly from around these parts." Naruto tried to think of a way to explain his origins without going into detail. "I'm from a village that was pretty backwater. I wanted to travel the country to learn more and all, but these things are new to me." He crossed his arms as he sighed slightly. "I only know about hollows and Shinigami from that one idiot in black." He failed to notice Shaiki sit up straighter and the look of slight confusion on her face as he continued. He didn't say much other than how someone needed one of these soul cutters to put the hollows down. Naruto then moved to unseal the sword he took from the Shinigami dude and produced it before everyone. When the puff of smoke cleared, he was rewarded by the sight of all the men leveling pistols at him, eyeing him and the sheathed weapon wearily. "Huh, you guys can see it. I'm not sure what makes this thing so special, Buhei." Shaiki quickly snatched the Zanpakuto from Naruto's hands before she unsheathed it just enough to see the blade. It was no fake, the spiritually synthesized steel was unmistakable. Somehow, someway, Naruto managed to steal an Asauchi from a Shinigami. "How did you get this?" Shaiki asked with her eyes still glued to the blade, gently tracing her fingers along the edge to see that the material was, in fact, the real deal. Seeing the forms of her men with their guns still drawn reflected in the Zanpakuto, she waved them off, the entourage stiffly holstering their firearms. Seeing that he had piqued her curiosity, Naruto concluded that mutual information wouldn't do too much harm. "Some idiot calling himself a Shinigami tried to take me in, but I smacked him around, took the sword, and then hung him up by a light post in the middle of the night before I got a room at a hotel." Naruto could see that Shaiki was too enamored by the sword to respond immediately. Even though this was no doubt from an unseated officer, the fact that Naruto still managed to take one astounded Shaiki. Mainly through the sheer dumb luck of it all, from what Naruto told her, he knew almost nothing about the supernatural other than it was new to him. Ears began to whir in her mind, coming up with ideas and potentialities of the implications of the blonde before her. Her training to inherit the family head position had taught her to take advantage of potential business and tactical opportunities whenever they presented themselves, and if this wasn't an opportunity, then she was blind and deaf. Here, sheathing the Asauchi, she handed it back to Naruto as he then performed that strange disappearing technique once more, and the sword was now placed back somewhere into the backpack he had. "Since you obviously don't know much of anything, you'll need to know certain things." It was phrased as a courtesy, but Shaiki knew it wasn't, it was an offer. The Hollow Hunter organization was one criminally lacking in fresh blood. The numbers of espers it took into its ranks had been diminishing since the Taisho era. And right now, someone who could hide his signature, kill a hollow and was skilled enough to pinch his Zanpakuto from a Shinigami sat before her. She could not be sure of his level of skill beyond these facts, all she knew was that right now, she had something he needed in the form of information, which gave her leverage to get her way. If a potential addition to their ranks could be enticed at the cost of a simple explanation, then she would be an idiot not to oblige him. And explain she did. Shaiki informed Naruto of the obvious, yes, the supernatural did exist. It may not line up exactly with what had seeped into popular culture over the last century, but there were enough cryptids and spectral oddities in Japan alone to fill a library's worth of books. A good chunk of those supernatural happenings revolving around the balance of souls that transmigrated between the world of the living, their world, and the soul society, the apparent afterlife of this world. The concept of a traversable afterlife was something that Naruto had a little trouble getting around at first, given Shaiki's choice to it, as both a spiritual realm and a physical place caused him to scratch his head in confusion. The explanation of the Shinigami was explained with much less flowery language, essentially souls that had a level of spiritual power drafted into a military police force which monitored and helped maintain the balance, a phrase that the black-haired young woman had all but spat with sarcasm, thick distaste. The Shinigami's method of maintaining balance was to cut down hollows with their Zanpakuto, so their souls would either pass on to the soul society, which would then have a second life, and then return to the world of the living as a new soul after their time there was done, or they would be cast down into hell for eternal punishment. Hollows were human souls, sometimes called pluses or holes, that had refused to move on and became twisted by their regrets, leaving a hole in their bodies and the need to continuously devour souls to ease the hunger brought on by the lack of a heart. It was pretty torturous in Naruto's mind, although he did have one question: so, wait, then what does that make you exactly? He asked in mild curiosity. I'm an Esper with a little extra kick, Shiki said as she shrugged in response. Spiritually aware humans are human derivatives with a supernatural power that manifests from either spiritual, psychic or biological oddities. Like fortune tellers or people with the ability to move things with their minds. Others have different skills and abilities, but they aren't important anymore. The way she said it implied they weren't around these days. Thinking back on the paradoxically clean bloodbath he had witnessed earlier, Naruto remembered her distinctly unnatural eyes when she first saw him, and I'm guessing those eyes of yours is that extra kick you mentioned. He would never forget their gaze that seemed to pierce through his body when she turned her knife on him. Shiki was hoping that he wouldn't bring that up, but it was her fault for not deactivating her eyes in the heat of the moment. Sighing at her negligence, Shiki felt it best to give him something to satisfy his curiosity. Yes, they let me see things most other spiritually aware people can't see. It's hereditary. She didn't want to go into full detail about her eyes and what they saw. However, depending on how he responded to her inevitable offer, she may have to give him more than the vaguest outlines of her family history. Fair warning, Shinigami don't take well to espers like me, or you. Raising a brow in slight confusion, Naruto didn't understand her words. What do you mean? What kind of problem do the Shinigami have with people like us? He figured he might as well play along with Shiki's perception of him being like her. He didn't think the I'm from another world's gambit would end well. Espers are seen by Shinigami as anomalies in the balance, she began to explain. Traditionally, the belief is that the only time mankind should become aware of the supernatural is the moment of their death. We fall outside that bracket. They have a history of hunting down groups of espers when they try to take matters of hollow suppression into their own hands or simply just live their lives as they are. Shiki may have been the current only active member of the Ryugi family in the Hollow Hunter organization, but she had been long schooled on why they had to keep beneath Shinigami notice. She could still remember the feeling of disgust that had coiled in her stomach upon hearing about the genocide of the Quincy nearly 200 years earlier, or that European coven of spiritual vampires that had been massacred in their homes. Harsh lessons learned by the survivors and other espers like herself. Now that caused Naruto's opinion of the black-clad swordsman to swing, his features souring at the thought. Why would they do that? Don't they know people like yourself could actually be beneficial in the long run in dealing with the hollows? Having allies was a major advantage to have when against enemies that could vary in abilities, and if Shinigami just used only swords to combat them, they needed to be more than just a one-trick pony. Shiki chuckled humorlessly at his words, naive, but not wrong. She relaxed before clarifying, Shinigami are arrogant in thinking they can patrol the entire world by themselves. That translates to them thinking that anything else stepping into that role is, therefore, wrong. Therefore, in their mind, others with power are threats to the balance, despite how much things would relatively stay the same. She could see how Naruto would ask how she knew this and stayed a step ahead of him. Our families had run-ins with Shinigami that talked too much for their own good. They were surprisingly informative with lectures on the supernatural and why we were cursed with knowledge and ability, so we've made sure to stay out of sight and out of mind from the Shinigami. Any one of them that gets too close, we put down without hesitation. She remembered the first Shinigami she had killed a little over 6 years ago, just a low-level recruit that got too full of himself before she slit his throat and dumped the corpse into a river. As Naruto digested everything Shiki had told him, he began to mull over just how complicated this new world had become in such a short time. He planned on staying mobile for much of his life before he found a place to settle down, but now he was burdened with the knowledge of the supernatural forces of this world that most likely would come for him one day. Humming to himself, Naruto picked himself up from the floor as he spoke. Well, thanks for the info, Shiki. I got the answers I was looking for, so I guess You certainly lack tact when it comes to talking to a woman. Shiki shouted in annoyance which surprised Naruto. He didn't think he was being rude to her. My brother doesn't live in this lifestyle anymore, so he's no longer able to help keep the hollows down like myself. And it's starting to get annoying being on my own on the job. So, she had a brother that didn't help hunt the hollows. She didn't mention that before, but then again, he hardly expected her to vomit her entire life story on him after one meeting. Though the way she worded her sentence had Naruto confused. What do you mean, exactly? Shiki collected herself after her initial outburst before she spoke. The Hollow Hunter organization is criminally understaffed. While we draft as many spiritually aware members as we can, very few of them in the current age show anything nearing special enough to actually hunt hollows. This lot are mostly just in it for the money and to clean up after me. Despite being what many would consider a blatant insult, the assembled suits maintained a businesslike composure. A few of the younger ones winced in embarrassment or gritted their teeth, but kept their mouths shut. They were all perfectly aware that Shiki could turn them all into pink mist if the inclination ever took her. Luckily, she usually sated that urge on the hollows of Sendai. If you had pissed off like I told you to, then we wouldn't be talking. Instead, you mask your presence, follow me home and reveal that you're essentially a hobo that managed to steal his Zanpakuto. The blonde grinned cheekily in response. Glad to know you value my skillset, he said, folding his arms as Shiki rolled her eyes. Don't patronize me. Shiki huffed. It was clear that while she was trying to talk business, she wasn't overly fond of it. The way I see it, we are at an impasse. You could either A. piss off and have Akataka drive you back into town, pretend you never saw this place, and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder for kimono-clad swordsmen. Or me if you loosen your tongue about what you now know about us. Shiki spoke with a steely finality that told the shinobi that this was no idle threat, it was instead a statement of irrefutable fact. Naruto regarded her silently, taking the beautiful young woman's measure. He was sure she would try if such a thing did occur. Despite all his power, he knew little of this world, and the shinobi wouldn't put it past one with such keen eyes to not pick up his trail if he talked. Not that he ever would, I promised that I'd never do that, and not going back on promises is something I pride myself on, you know. He said lightheartedly, but his eyes were so much more than that. The pools of cool blue had a fire in them, an intangible force of will that was a challenge. And option B. Shiki smirked knowingly. We could hire you as a freelancer under the Ryugi. You'd have a way to earn cash, travel around, and our protection if any Shinigami comes looking into you. Pouting as she rested her chin in the palm of her hand, she added, right now, you kinda tick me off, but if I let this opportunity pass us by, then my old man will probably chew me out about not seizing assets or whatever other lesson he has. So that was it. Shiki wanted him to join her family's group in hunting down the hollows. All things considered, it wasn't a lousy occupation, and if she really mentioned freelance, that meant they would pay him on a certain measure, most likely based on each hollow killed. On the one hand, the job offer was something that would provide him more experience in dealing with the supernatural, along with being able to explore this new land to his heart's content as his godfather would have done before him. On the other hand, he was being used by others for his skills and power. It was a meritocracy that would endure so long as he was of use, and that day may well come if his antics outweighed his effectiveness. The critical difference between his time as a Konoha shinobi boiled down to semantics. Only before he had no real say in what jobs he was given. Shiki was hiring him to help take care of hollows and ensure people could pass on to the afterlife, wherever it may be. Before I give my answer, Naruto spoke in a cautious tone, Shiki picking up on his deep thoughts, what kind of restrictions would I have placed on me? He knew that there was no such thing as a free lunch, his face perked up in surprise by what Shiki had to say. It doesn't matter really, so long as you send in a report once a month. That's oddly lenient. Seems almost too good to be true. Well, this wasn't an opportunity he could turn down, and it was unlikely he'd get it ever again if he turned her down now, so, alright, Shiki. Consider me a freelance hollow hunter for you. Naruto held his hand out for her to take, with Shiki understanding, and they shook firmly. As Naruto took her hand, he noticed how bizarre it felt. It was warm yet carried a cold sensation along with it. It was rough from the wear of using weapons for a long time, most likely from all her years of practice, yet there was a tenderness to it that almost made her feel like the noble she seemed to be. Elegant and graceful in the way she shook his hand. Not forgetting that he was now technically working for her, he released her hand as he made to question her on a few more queries with his newly minted profession. By the way, you wouldn't happen to know any apartments in the city that's affordable for chump change? Shiki snorted in response, didn't you say you wanted to travel the country? There was the faint ghost of a smirk on her face that made her look mockingly haughty, though Naruto could see that it wasn't cruel or spiteful. She was simply poking fun at him, so why bother getting an apartment here? Naruto's sweat dropped subtly at her words. It was only after asking that he realized how it must have sounded. Well, I did plan on that, but now that I've got a job, I wouldn't mind getting a place nearby when I want to visit a friend is all. Shiki glowered incredulously at the implication of her as a friend, grumbling under her breath that they barely met an hour ago, that, and going by the calluses on your hands, I venture you're a competent sword user, so I gotta ask, can you stand teaching someone like me? He threw his hands up as he continued, I do better with knives and smaller weapons, but having sword skills could do me some good in the future. Shiki clicked her teeth as she mulled over the ninja's question, seeing that he was genuinely asking her to teach him the ways of the sword. So, I meet a vagabond, hire him, and now he's calling me a friend and wants me to teach him how to use a sword. What the hell is today? Well, he was able to make off with an Asauchi from a Shinigami, and if he planned on using it, then it would serve to make sure that he was adequately prepared for future encounters with hollows and the occasional nosy Shinigami that might take notice. I can teach you the forms, but there's only so much I can do. She knew all too well that her teaching would come to an end in time. You strike me as the learn by doing sort. But eventually, the sword will start to teach you itself. If he did manage to imprint on it, then there was nothing much else she could teach him. Naruto wasn't sure what Shiki meant by that last statement. What does that mean, exactly? You'll learn later on when you start to hear voices in your head, Shiki replied nonchalantly. She figured it best to make sure he was somewhat prepared for if the Asauchi become a full Zanpakuto, yet at the same time, she thought it would be amusing to see his reaction when he would see the spirit of the sword. As for the ninja, he was somewhat relieved, yet at the same time dreading the news. Well, I've got that going for me already. Kurama's gruff realism was an annoyance sometimes, despite the pep talk they had at times. If any other voices crop up, they better stay the hell away from me. Kurama had to deal with his siblings dropping by on occasion back home, and to learn that another voice could intrude at any moment due to a stupid sword was going to be irritating. Shiki stared at Naruto curiously at what he said. What? He had officially graduated from annoying vagabond to annoying interest that now worked for her. Seeing the expression on Shiki's face, he could see where this was going and quickly tried to defuse the upcoming question. Nothing. Just I kind of find myself talking to myself sometimes when I'm trying to answer a question. Shiki's exasperated deadpan told him that his hastily made excuse sounded as poor out loud as it had in his head. Not believing what he said, but dropping the subject, for now, Shiki just played along. Sounds like you need some help up here then. Shiki made a slight jab with his little fib, tapping the side of her head, but got the feeling she'd find out in time. For now, though, it was best to let him believe he had her fooled. Naruto looked annoyed by her suggestion. Hey, I'm good as is. Seeing that he had nowhere to stay for the night, the ninja decided to head out to look for a hotel until he could get an apartment. Well, I'm gonna head on out to look for a place to sleep tonight. Though it seemed Shiki was having none of that, we have a spare guest room in the workers' quarters of the grounds. There was no way in hell she was just gonna turn him loose before she had him vetted. Shiki wanted to keep an eye on him for anything out of the ordinary or something that she and her family would consider unusual in the supernatural. The door opened once more as the man who had left previously nodded to Shiki. Akataka will show you to your temporary quarters. You'll have an apartment by tomorrow. It might not be the prettiest, but at least you won't need to worry about finding one. Shiki gestured behind Naruto as he turned to see the man with a set of papers step forward. Akataka Suzuragi. I'm Lady Shiki's attendant and the Ryugi family's aide with the supernatural. He held his hand out for Naruto to take, with the two sharing a brief but firm handshake. Every report you make, you'll send to me. You'll be provided with the necessary equipment to fulfill your duties. Anything that comes across as suspicious report it in, even if it may be something minor. Even if an event didn't openly appear to be important, it could always hold something hidden within. Damn, you guys work fast. Naruto said in surprise, his energy being sandbagged by Akataka's deadpan. Recognizing his new position, Naruto sobered and nodded in acceptance. I understand. As Naruto left with Akataka along with the other men under her family's employment, Shiki knew that odds are her father already knew the situation and she elected to not keep him waiting. As she walked through the halls outside to the office building where her parents ran their business when not at the office, she looked off to the other side of the estate grounds where Akataka was leading Naruto to the workers' quarters and stepped inside, but not before he turned just enough to catch her in his sights as he waved to her. She activated her eyes once more to see if she could see what she usually could on hollows, only to catch the same lines as all things had, and yet she saw something else within the blonde. Something that flowed and circulated within him wasn't like the same spiritual energy as she and other beings had. She shook her head. It was a question for another time after she had gotten a better feel for her new employee. She opted not to bring it up to her father. Heading inside, Shiki made her way through the building to where she now stood in front of the door to her father's office. Knocking on the door, Shiki made her presence known. Father. Come in, Shiki. The gruff voice of her father came through the other side. Opening the door to step into the office, Shiki saw how her father was finishing up some paperwork on a portfolio, most likely as part of the land ownership they still had alongside managing and consulting potential partnerships with other companies in the country and overseas. This was on top of ensuring that they still held a firm grip on the criminal underworld, along with maintaining ties with specific figures in authority to keep the supernatural a secret and keeping up with their fellow family allies in the Hollow Hunter organization. Not looking up from his work, Akihiro Ryugi continued to write as Shiki now stood in front of his desk, though he gestured for her to sit. I trust you know what transpired in the meeting hall. Setting his pen down, Akihiro now directed his full attention towards his daughter and heir to their family. I heard that you spoke with a young man that's spiritually aware and followed you home after he witnessed you killing a hollow. There wasn't anything negative in his tone, he was merely stating facts though phrased in a disapproving way. The young Ryugi girl nodded her head in clipped assurance, I did, and after speaking with him, I offered him a job working for us as another hollow hunter, since Kanam isn't involved with the business anymore. He accepted. Akihiro remained silent as a pensive look came across his face. He asked me to teach him swordplay after he took an Asauchi from a Shinigami. Akirio's eyes widened a fraction in his otherwise lined face. Yes, I know. I confirmed it myself when he produced it in a puff of smoke, something she hadn't seen coming, yet it didn't deter her from continuing with business. Tonight he'll be staying in the spare room in the workers' quarters until she corrected, ensure he has an apartment in the city. She could see how the gears in her father's head were turning, wondering why she chose this route when dealing with an outsider. Akihiro was an old-fashioned man who didn't hesitate to resort to violence if the occasion called for it. Granted, she had never seen such things happen when she was forced to observe meetings with other businessmen, yakuza, and officials to be prepared for the role as the next family head. Though he wasn't really one of those men that would call anyone who didn't look Japanese a gaijin and discriminate simply because of that. That usually would wind up backfiring and crippling whoever took such things to heart, with no way of recovering whatever it is that they lost. Shiki prepared herself for the lecture she knew Akihiro was likely frothing at the mouth to give her for acting rashly, however okay, he said simply, clicking his pen and stowing it neatly in his stationery pot. Okay? Akihiro could see that his daughter was somewhat confused by the lack of an explanation. I trust that you're making the right decision with this boy. Rising from his desk without warning, the man made his way over to a cabinet on the far wall that he unlocked before opening, revealing a black katana in a red sheath. Shiki, you're on your way to being the family head, and as such, decisions like these will be what will either make you a good leader or a fool. Shiki remained silent as her father caressed the lacquered redwood of the sheath. I'm sure that whatever information Akataka comes up with will reveal who the boy is, but if he can help us lay hollows without complaint, then we will welcome him. Turning back to Shiki, his eyes softened, and for a moment, the caring father peered out from behind the jaded businessman. Kanesada Kuji has been used to defend these lands for 5 centuries, passed from parent to child to protect the land. We protect it from hollows, humans and Shinigami alike. We kill hollows to ensure that people can pass on and can live without the threat of eternal death. We make sure that humanity lives in ignorance of the supernatural so they can sleep at night. We ensure the Shinigami remain unaware of our organization, as well as safeguard those scions of humanity that do not fear what goes bump in the night. It was all part of their family duty to keep these objectives in mind, yet to also ensure another thing, but we must also make sure that our family is just as human as the rest of the world. We are not so aloof to deny talent when we see it in an Esper, Quincy, Fulbringer or anything else who is cursed with power. Akihiro made his way over to his daughter as he placed his hands on her shoulders. I have done all that I can to ensure you're prepared to take over my position one day when you're old enough. Our methods may have been cold, but your mother and I have also loved you like any parents would. Whatever may come from this boy, I trust your decision-making and skills to see through the choices you make. Dropping his arms, Akira made his way back to his desk as he sat down to continue on with his work. So, now I'm going to step back from this bit of business and let you step up. Consider it part of your learning process when managing people in the future. Shiki had remained silent throughout her father's speech, knowing all of what he entailed. Now it fell to her to make sure that Naruto fell under her purview, though she knew that she couldn't do it independently since she was still in high school, meaning she would need Akataka's aid on occasion. I understand, father. Naruto now works for our family, though mainly me since I made the offer, and he's my responsibility. She said with some annoyance in her tone, something that amused her father as he gave a brief chuckle before getting back to work. Have a good night, father. Good night, Shiki, Akihiro said, listening to the padding footsteps of his daughter leaving. He snorted at something only he knew. Leaving her father's office, Shiki went straight to her room, where she stripped her kimono off before neatly placing them where a maid would come for them for laundry tomorrow morning, and threw her pajamas on to get some sleep. And yet, as she tried to do so, that nagging feeling of the lack of Naruto's presence following her kept Shiki up for a while before she managed to close her eyes. Although, there was some part of her that was now all too intrigued by the whiskered blonde. Workers' quarters. Having been brought to one of the spare rooms in the workers' quarters, he had to compliment the amenities. Wow, this is actually pretty nice for the hired help. It was a little bigger than his old apartment back in the Leaf Village, complete with a futon, furniture, a television, a small kitchenette, and even a bathroom that was clean and well stocked. They definitely take care of their employees, more than some of the nobles back home. You expected them to have the same standards as those in a completely different world. Hearing how his partner was slightly intrigued, or was it in disbelief by his conclusion, Naruto shrugged. Sometimes it was hard to tell what the fox's tone was trying to convey, considering through sheer cosmic fluke, it has the same language and writing style despite being separate worlds. A little, yeah, I suppose a bit. There were a great many things that his homeworld and Japan had in common. The language, religion, architecture, history, even certain aspects of culture. But it also advanced at a far faster rate than their own. This was possibly due to a combination of lack of inherent power and vastly superior population numbers. With so many more people not having access to the means of a higher yet baser form of war, they had been forced to advance through a sheer unending tide of smashing millions of heads against a problem to get a result that would work for all. Take guns, for example. Back home they were considered to be archaic and pointless, given most shinobi who reached Chunin had subsonic reactions and could throw a kunai far faster than a bullet. He had only ever seen a gun on a mission once, a bulky rifle behind a shopkeeper's desk in Wave 1. But this societal difference and the conspicuous absence of espers in prominent roles, this world had been forced to take a different path and yield a result where the gun was the kunai of the common folk and the civilians numbered in the billions. Naruto chewed his lip as he turned down the futon, wondering if these Shinigami's need to maintain the balance had allowed or manipulated the advance of society to not explore the mysteries that sat beyond the doors to perception. Well, food for thought for another time. Setting his stuff on the nearby dresser, Naruto took a quick shower to get all the daytime grunge off before retiring for the evening and tried to get to sleep, yet his mind could not find rest at the night's events, for questions lingered on. I wonder how the apartment's going to be. He hoped it was larger than his old one. Hueco Mundo, the Palace of Las Notches. In the realm of hollows, there is no day nor sun. Merely the large moon perpetually in the opposite phase to its double in the world of the living, and the endless white sand covering the domain of these lost souls, hungering for their existence to be satiated. It did not conform to physics or the laws of man in its profane majesty. Instead, it simply was. An observer could be forgiven for thinking that the sharp tree-like spires that jutted from the sands were plant life, or that there was no water in a desert. They were wrong, for scant dark clouds were picked out by the moon's pale light in the sky. It wasn't even a moon, not truly. There was, after all, no sun for it to illuminate its surface and breath light gently onto the quiet and lonely place. As to what the great crescent-shaped object was, it was a secret few knew, and even fewer would dare to utter aloud. 2. Only in the Palace of Las Notches did those who held any semblance of sentience would gather under the roofless fortress that rivaled the Shinigami's Sirite, but only to serve its king. Berrigan Luisenbairn sat resplendent in a morose yet majestic throne. His bastion of power was massive in scope and Spartan in appearance, a black marble floor that stretched out for dozens of kilometers around the dais where his throne was placed. Las Notches looked like a ziggurat with its top sheared off, and skyscraper-tall Corinthian pillars dotted equidistantly to cast long thick shadows. Behind him rose a pole of pure obsidian just as high as the pillars, but adorned with a single giant half-bell that swayed gently in the desert breeze, a haunting chime ringing out for miles around. He was a vast old lord of immense power who clashed with many others over the title of King of the Hollows and had rightfully earned it. Unlike many of the hollows that populated the realm and beyond, Berrigan held no flesh to his being, merely being a skeleton that held his own power of senescentia that roiled at the heart of his lich's form. His body was draped in a royal purple cloak, with a pitch-black tattered fur collar around his neck area and the fringes of his mantle, which gave him a macabre appearance strongly reminiscent of a lich. Several lengths of golden chain dangled out of his armbands. At the center of his chest near his neck, he wore an elegant pendant shaped like that of a bloody red eye with a viper's pupil, giving him his clear vision of what was before him. He wore white pointed toe boots for his feet and wore an extravagantly decorated bejeweled crown with a chain running downward on the left side. What was most prominent, however, was the crack-like scar that ran down the right side of his skull, showing the only battle scar he had obtained throughout his time as a hollow, yet it was not from his conquest to become the king, but an encounter with an absurdly powerful Ajucha. I wonder, Muraku 3, has your existence become as boring as my own, or is it the other way around, eh? He said to himself, tracing the scar with a long finger. Berrigan was reminiscing about the past when he encountered the lone hollow that was devouring his kingdom's inhabitants by the horde and battled him. The great salamander who reigned over the storm and had vaunted to tear down the sky to strike out at the limbless king. Berrigan had laughed when he had first told him of his intent. After all, nothing mattered beyond his domain, so what was the point in conquering that ever-distant king so far away? This had not changed the fact that despite being an Ajucha, the great salamander was with no hyperbole, the most terrifying thing the king had ever seen. Despite the few dozen vast lord that he'd bested and encountered to take the throne, none of them could compare to that monster of a hollow. As such, he decided to make a pact with the being that neither would interfere with one another's business and kept it civil. That was millennia ago, and not a word peeped about the gargantuan cannibal. Now all was quiet from where he once emerged from. Despite having built Los Notches, created this grand army of hollows, Barragan was now becoming bored with his existence. He had become the king, no, perhaps it was better to call himself the god of Hueco Mundo, as no other hollow had the gall to challenge him. The monarch was so very old now, he could no longer remember his own origin, but that did not mean he didn't know things that the vaunted Soul Society would wish he didn't, facts and secrets that would bring their little world tumbling down. That would be funny if he wasn't apathetic to the effort a war would cost. There was that one feminine shark-like hollow that had her own small following, but that was mere days ago where he demanded her obedience, and she defied him. Well, usually this would have been a problem, she was but one vast lord, one who thought she needed to no longer cannibalize to continue gaining strength, depending on others for strength. What utter nonsense. A god such as myself has no need but obedience from subjects to show my own strength. There are things about us hollows that only I and the great salamander know. It was absurd. Despite the fleeting enjoyment Barragan had gained from that day, it was gone like an ephemeral moment. Now he simply sat on his throne with what would have been a bored expression on his visage had he had flesh and his mask translucent. Do I even have a mask anymore? There is no face beneath this visage, and the trinket at my head is a spoil of war. He looked down to his subjects, the generals of his army kneeling before him in clean rows on opposite sides, while an attendant came with a flagon of water, a commodity in this realm, to his side. And what would I gain from it? I have no lips to moisten, no tongue to taste or thirst to slake. Just time and boredom. Waving the attendant off, Barragan's boredom only increased, I don't want any. Wondering what to do, all he could do was continue on with his thoughts aloud now, thinking such a thing would give him an idea, I'm bored. There's nothing as meaningless as an army that only awaits invasion. No enemy to go forth and conquer. Looking to his generals, Barragan wondered if any held even a modicum of decency to speak, as to not paint them all as dogs, don't you all think so? There was no answer. Barragan could only sigh at their lack of action, not sure why I even bothered to ask you all. No one would disagree with me here. He enjoyed having dominance, yet having something to say in opposition to him would have proven somewhat entertaining enough to lift the boredom from his shoulders. Barragan would have called for the court alchemist, thinking something of his doom could alleviate his boredom, but it would appear that there would be no need for such an action. Out of nowhere, the hall's guardian, Gagamel, was suddenly split in half and killed, with a resounding explosion and accompanying rip of flesh being torn to bits. One of the generals turned to see the carnage and could not properly respond, what just happened? Gagamel's been killed. Another of the generals shouted in response to the sudden attack. All who were in the hall turned to the source of their comrade's death to see three men in black kimonos wearing white haori with black diamonds at the hem. Two of them, the tall, bespectacled man with messy brown hair and square-framed glasses and the dark-skinned gentleman wearing a wraparound visor over his eyes, carried katana of green and orange respectively, while the third, a silver-haired man with his face set in a vulpine smirk, held a pale-colored tanto. The one with silver hair was the one that seemingly had killed Gagamel after flicking his tanto to remove the blood from it. The one with glasses seemed to be their leader, he merely stared at Barragan in contemplation, while the other two who Barragan could only assume were watching the others, even if they didn't appear to be doing so. Identify yourselves. Another general lunged in for the opening attack, but found himself being split in half by the dark-skinned man's sword, just as Gagamel had been. His body quickly dissipated, showcasing to the king that these men would kill all of his generals if they continued attacking so recklessly. They probably deserve it if they were so ignorant to not recognize Shinigami in the heart of the palace. Don't go overboard, Jin. The one in glasses identified the silver-haired man. Stand down, Barragan ordered, all movement ceasing. Perhaps these men could satiate his boredom. This is just the thing I need to pass the time. Who are you? Why have you strangers come here, may I ask? Upon closer inspection, Barragan would have assumed they were Shinigami captains, but considering how long it had been since he had seen one, he could only assume that they have changed in the centuries since then. The one with glasses continued peering at him before speaking in a calm and collected voice, very pleased to meet you, my name is Aizen. Samsuke Aizen is my full name. We've never met before, and I can presume that you are Barragan, the king of Hueco Mundo. His mannerisms were polite and cold, yet there was no real hostility coming from his posture. It was all too relaxed and quaint, indeed I am. For now, Barragan supposed he could indulge whatever he was here for, and what exactly are you? Since none of you are wearing masks, I can only assume that you're not hollows. Are you humans, or perhaps more likely, Shinigami? The questions were a formality. Shrugging off what answer Aizen would have given, Barragan continued on, well, I suppose it doesn't really matter what you are in the end. Truthfully, I've been growing weary in recent times. Had you not shown up, I would have ordered my army to split in half and kill each other off if it could provide some small measure of entertainment. Leaning closer to the Shinigami from his throne, Baragon felt that perhaps he was being a bit rude by not introducing them to his palace. Be that as it may, I suppose I should greet you cordially. Welcome to my palace, Las Notches. How amusing. The dark-skinned one snorted in wry amusement by the king's words. You call this place a palace, despite there not being any walls or roof over your head. Turning to one of the generals that still looked eager to pounce, the man made a snide remark without any sarcasm. I guess the king of Waco Mundo has his own sense of humor. Shaking his head at the man's unabashed baiting, Baragon explained a bit of said humor. I have no need for a roof. I am the king of this realm, and the very sky of Waco Mundo is the roof of my palace. From the black clouds to that thing that hovers over us all. I see. The dark-skinned man didn't even contemplate his words before responding. Well, I suppose that's one way of looking at it. That's quite enough, Canum. Aizen interrupted, now identifying the dark-skinned man as Canum. There's no point in baiting him. Indeed, there wasn't. Shinigami insects such as these men whose power he could only count as minute, weren't worth getting angry over something as trivial as the difference of one's roof. Aizen raised his voice slightly as he addressed Baragon directly. Your Majesty, I was hoping we might have a little chat. Drawing his katana from the sheath, Aizen held it up for him to see in plain sight. Could you take a look at my sword? It's called Kimka Sujetsu. The sword was pointed down towards the black marble stone flags and in no shape or form appeared to be changing into anything. So, it was a Zanpakuto. Then why bother revealing its name and form to him? Nothing had changed from it, which brought the question to the forefront of Baragon's mind, and why should I care? What are you up to? I wish to ask you a simple question. Color him intrigued by Aizen's response. What is it? Tell me, Aizen began, are you satisfied with your existence as it stands in this moment? What? To Baragon, this was such a strange thing to ask, but for Aizen, it was confirmation of his own deductions of the type of personality that Baragon had and how he would need to ensure he could be subjugated. Seeing that the king needed a better explanation behind what he offered, Aizen elaborated while Jin and Canum did their work, as he had already done his part. Have you ever looked around and felt your world was not the way it should be? Jin had finished with one lot now. Do you ever find yourself wishing you could achieve a higher greatness? And now Canum was done with his lot. There are some things about this world that do not make sense, something amiss on such a grand scale that only those who have lived scores of millennia can see it. I am one such being, though what would I do with that knowledge and power? Baragon seemed to contemplate the worlds he had given him, only now it laid on whether or not he would follow. I can help you. You just have to obey me. No reaction to such a demand, and it appeared to Aizen that things were going smoothly. If you do, I can give you greater power and show you the way to a greater world. Greater power? A greater world, you say? Once again, Baragon did not react openly, allowing Aizen to continue on. That's right. My research into evolving the soul will soon be complete. I'm currently researching ways to grant Shinigami the power that Hollows have and to evolve the powers that Hollows have developed to imitate Shinigami. Baragon hummed at the prospect. By removing the boundaries between the two opposing states, one such as yourself could achieve a higher greatness. You could truly lead the way to stepping forth into a newer, greater world. Now it was time to see how Baragon would take this. Suffice to say that he expected what happened next was within his gauging of the Hollow King. Baragon stifled a chuckle before he could no longer contain his laughter as it echoed throughout Las Notches. How disappointing. What an amusing proposal. Baragon gestured towards Aizen as he had to rein in his laughter, the thick golden bangles rattling around his skeletal wrists. You actually have the nerve, the audacity and the bare-faced cheek to suggest that I can achieve even greater power and a greater world. More than what I already have. Amusement then turned to anger, the shadows on the king's skull grew deeper. Don't make me laugh. I am the king of Waco Mundo, the king of all I survey. No one can surpass my power, least of all you foolish Shinigami. Baragon declared in pride and righteous anger, rising from his throne as a cloud passed before the moon. Well, it would seem that Aizen would have to drop the illusion soon. No world exists that is beyond my control. Aizen tutted at the rebuttal he was given. How unfortunate. Pointing his hand to the Shinigami, Baragon gave a shout of orders. Attack them now, my generals. Let their hubris drag them to their doom. The Hollows converged on the dark trio of Shinigami, ready to devour them. One shot his fingers at Canum, who deflected the attack with his katana, while Jin held back the fist of another with his own. Baragon held out a hand and a large double-bladed black axe formed from black particles as he gestured for the Hollows around Aizen to stand back. I will kill you myself. They backed away as Baragon directed his attention to Aizen. You're about to be killed by the king of Waco Mundo, consider this an honor. Aizen shrugged at his words. It seems awfully ironic for the king of Waco Mundo. Think about it, my friend. Aizen pointed at the large black axe Baragon held in his bone grasp. Even though you're a hollow, the way you wield your weapon and your giant black form remind me very much of a Shinigami. Silence. Baragon leapt from his throne and cleaved Aizen in half, with his power rotting the body away. He then turned his attention to Jin and Kanem and slashed them in half with the same results as others who dared oppose him. HMPF. What a fool. Even in the end, you couldn't even put up a proper fight. Sighing at how things transpired so quickly, Baragon hoped that his boredom could be satiated longer than this. How pathetic. He said aloud once more to himself, they were hardly worth any effort. What occurred next caught him off guard completely. A sudden strike came for him as it nearly took his head, only to slice his crown in half instead. And had Baragon had eyes, they would be wide in shock and disbelief as he saw the Shinigami standing before him without a scratch on them, as Aizen's sword was now pointing at him. What is this? How can you still be alive? Aizen wasted no time explaining it to the king. My Zanpakuto, Kimka Suggestu, has the power of complete hypnosis. It should have been a simple thing to be understood, yet for some, that did not appear to be the case. What are you talking about? Perhaps it was the fact that Baragon was so caught off guard by the ability that he hadn't had time to process it. In other words, the people you defeated before were nothing more than illusions. The complete hypnosis granted Aizen the ability to control all 5 senses of his enemy, making them think and believe whatever it was that was around them. And what better way than to destroy the illusion that Baragon was in control this whole time was to show him the truth. Shatter, Kimka Suggestu. The world around Baragon shattered like a mirror at Aizen's command. Instead of his generals all healthy and ready, instead, now their bloody remains were before Baragon's sight. Their bodies cut to pieces as blood smeared the floors and pillars of the hall. Wow, what is happening? Aizen kept his blade pointed at Baragon the entire time. You speak of the oddities of this world you claim as yours, of a marriage only you can see. This is your world stripped of all mirage. This was what he meant by greater world. Now it made sense about Aizen's words when he spoke to him about the world and his place in it. You bastard. Raising his axe high to attack, he found the blades of Jin and Kanem now pointed at his neckline, ready to sever his life. Don't do anything rash. Aizen said calmly, it's pointless. You won't be able to kill me. And it was true. Baragon could do nothing right now, and if he did, Aizen's cohorts would be ready to slice his head clean off in an instant. He attempted to unleash his Respira to mulch the entire castle, but was blindsided when a bolt of hot pink light flashed out from the shadow of one of the pillars, striking Baragon in the back of the head and, much to his shock, temporarily sealing his irresistible power. Well, that was certainly worth the watch. A new voice had cut in from the shadow. I felt you three approach and had a feeling you were up to something, but the source of the voice was revealed to be an Arrancar. I didn't think you'd have it in you to take lost notches for yourselves. He had shoulder-length messy pink hair with bangs on the right side of his forehead and amber eyes. The remains of his hollow mask had taken the form of rectangular framed glasses, giving him a scholarly appearance. Instead of a standard jacket, he wore a long shirt that covered his entire torso up to the top of his neck. As for what he wore had 3 stripes on his jacket, each starting at his collar with 2 running all 3 lines on his uniform dropped to his right hip and a pair of white gloves on his hands. All in all, he appeared to be a scientist like the Shinigami under Mayuri's direction, judging by how he wore a lab coat. And might I ask who you are? Aizen was intrigued by the Arrancar if he was able to hide his presence before announcing himself. You're obviously an Arrancar, yet your appearance doesn't demonstrate someone that fights. Oh, don't mistake my appearance for anything. The Arrancar stated as he adjusted his glasses, well, I have subordinates to fight for me. I'm not afraid to get my hands bloody if need be, like my colleagues here in the Espada. More Arrancar like this one? Aizen was undoubtedly intrigued. Tell me, are there more Arrancar like yourself? Naturally occurring Arrancar. As far as his research had gone, Hollows weren't able to become high-level Arrancar outside of the Minos class, and even then, they weren't much of anything to consider worth much. The Arrancar bowed before introducing himself. My name is Saelapor Grants, chief alchemist of the. He glanced at the now powerless Baragon, former king of Hueco Mundo. You bastard. And Espada number 0. As for your question, there are a few, though I'm sure your power will make them flock to your side. Inspecting Saelaporo closer, Aizen could see that he was someone that researched things not all that differently than himself, Urahara or Mayuri. If perhaps maybe instead self-centered if he was any judge of character, staying in the shadows while watching what occurred before striking like an opportunistic viper. If he had done so, then it was doubtless that his Zanpakuto had already affected him, leaving him as one less to hypnotize. Then I take it you heard my offer to Baragon. Saelaporo gave the skeleton a glance as he smirked, that I have, and as a scientist, more than an alchemist, I'm intrigued by your offer playing things safe and smooth. The scientist bent a knee in submission, Lord Aizen. And so began the Espada under Samsuke Aizen. World of the living. The Ryugi estate, workers' quarters. Seeing that today would be the start of his new life, Naruto got up early to get a decent workout before showering off the sweat and smell of the morning and readied himself for what was to come. Okay, got my clothes packed. Check. Bath stuff. Check. Zan. Check. Tools. Check. Having gathered and organized all of his stuff, Naruto started packing up until he heard a knock on the door. "Hey, you up yet?" asked a familiar disinterested woman's voice. Had Shiki come to see him? Guess she wanted to see how he was or confirm that last night hadn't been a fever dream. Heading over to the doorway, Naruto opened to see Shiki in a yellow kimono with an envelope in hand before shoving it in his arms. "Your apartment's been set up, along with everything you'll need to report in every month on top of anything that seems suspicious. Learn how to use a fax machine." Turning away from him, Shiki gestured for him to follow her. "Come on, I'll show you around a bit and where you'll be living." That was certainly fast. Shiki's family must have had them do it overnight once he signed on with them. Wow, talk about rapid service. Naruto quickly grabbed his stuff as he followed Shiki outside, where he saw several of the family's workers were tending to the garden, laundry and other various things outdoors. At the same time, it appeared that more of the family guards were present than last night. "It's just a precaution from my caretaker." Naruto turned his attention back to Shiki in front of him as she led on while giving him a glance over the shoulder. "You're still being checked out, so he's just making sure security is tight." Shiki turned back ahead of her as they made their way through the estate's main building and continued on that, "And they want to make sure that no one followed you last night." Naruto shrugged that concern off. "I'm pretty sure I'd notice if I was being followed." With his senjutsu basically being on autopilot, the possibility was unlikely. If one of those hollows or Shinigami came calling, they wouldn't have been able to keep up with me. If they did, I would have given them the slip like it was nothing. He had trained with Jiraiya to hide himself from being detected by sensory types back on the trip, which was something that paid off well enough. Still, he rarely could use that knowledge, since his enemies had been so damn dogmatic in tracking him down and being far more confrontational than the usual enemies he had gone up against. Shiki hummed at his words, "Then I suppose we'll see how you'll do in the future." In truth, she didn't doubt his words, given how he made himself undetectable to her, and she knew well enough the different types of spirit energy that hollows and Shinigami used and how their spiritual pressures felt. Hiding it wasn't an easy feat at times, mainly for the hollows that she encountered on a near-daily basis and the unseated Shinigami. But she had a feeling that more evolved, more experienced hollows and Shinigami could hide their presence, but Shiki doubted that anything more than run-of-the-mills would be what they encountered. In the days to come, she would come to learn that Naruto Uzumaki was the personification of the phrase "lightning does strike twice." Eventually, they made it outside to the curved driveway where a black van was parked with two men, one of them Akataka already inside. "Time to show you around." The pair got inside, where Naruto began looking over the envelope's contents, along with giving Naruto an ID, notes on his apartment, along with notes on hollows and Shinigami, even a map of the city and major spots where the two beings would often be reported at. "Your apartment situated not too far from here, though it's part of a small complex compared to the others in the prefecture. It has everything you'll need for the job, on top of the furniture that got moved in just after dawn." Shiki said as she looked out the window at the rolling city passing them by. "They probably aren't done with the utilities, so I think before we get there, we'll go see a movie. I've been wanting to see that Yankee film about the killer robot, the Terminator. I've got the time to spare, but seeing a film alone is worthless." So, Shiki wanted to spend time showing him around, but was lethargic towards downtime. Well, he supposed that it wouldn't be a bad thing at all really, although, that sounds nice, but what's the Terminator? Shiki's head snapped in his direction with eyes wide in amazement. "You're kidding, right? It's been previewing on all the TV channels. You can't tell me you've never heard of it by now, since it's been out for a week already." She couldn't believe what she was hearing right now. Naruto merely shrugged as he shook his head. "Never heard of it until now." Shiki massaged her temples as she was coming to the realization just how much Naruto wasn't aware of what was in the modern cities and media. Note to self, brick-level social skills. "I can see we're going to have a lot of work to do today. After this, I'm going shopping for some new materials for my kimonos, but you're carrying all my stuff," she proclaimed as she pointed directly at Naruto, who now saw that he would become the bag boy for Shiki. Her accusatory finger gave off the image that this was his fault for mucking up her evening, and not even Kurama could follow that logic. Naruto's face scrunched in confusion, trying to connect the dots of how seeing a movie was a punishment. He could have sworn he heard some stifled chuckles from Akataka and the other guard, but they were stone-faced and not letting their unprofessionalism show. "Guess who just became the pack mule today?" Kurama teased. "Shut up." This would be the day that would establish Naruto and Shiki's relationship for the foreseeable future. Employer and pack mule. Part-time hollow hunters. Next. Quincy Archer is pretty chill. And done, there was a lot going on in my life, and I apologize for not being able to get this chapter out sooner. Writer's block was hitting me hard as my synopsis didn't get this far, that being Naruto and Shiki heading into the city, though I felt that perhaps it would be best if I ended the chapter here and save for any more time spending between Naruto and Shiki for later chapters for their eventual development into a couple. Other stuff being FGO story and events, the release of a few games, which most notably being Halo Infinite, along with doing synopsis stuff for my other stories got to me. Now for Sendai. It's a city that bears a resemblance in some ways to Mifune City where KNK took place in, and as such some of the KNK characters will make an appearance and what their roles are, along with some Fate characters and things as well, though I won't name names, rather you'll just have to wait and see who pops up and how things'll go. Although keep in mind that it's 1984, so there will be some cultural changes here and there, given that Showa-era Japan was quite bizarre at times. What if Naruto was a royal guard in Bleach? End here, and thanks for watching my video till the end.